And you are live.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm calling to order. My name is Robert Waldman. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Planning Commission, and I'm going to call this regularly scheduled meeting to order. Um, and I would like to just advise you that the reason we're late is because the chairman himself is having problems, technological problems getting in. And I find that surprising because he's a former military guy, and me, I'm just an English major, and I figured out a way to get in. So, at any rate, the meeting is called to order. Madam Hook, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Waldman,
I'm present.
Mr. Imes,
Here.
Ms. Butler,
Here.
Mr. Klein,
Present.
Mr. Sale.
Okay, when he joins us later, Madam Secretary, could you just note when he comes in?
Sure will.
I'll hand the gavel over to him.
He's joining us now.
We have some minutes to approve from the August 5th meeting. Everybody has had the opportunity to read them, I assume. I saw that there were several minor editorial comments. With those editorial comments, it's basically just to highlight the things that we said that we think should be added to that legislation in red. Do I hear any discussion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Well, I'm sorry. One of the things that came up was there was an interesting email exchange, and I thought it was a good email exchange about whether we should keep a column that says in opposition when we're marking people either in favor or commented on. So for instance, there were several people who were in opposition, but instead of just being, marked as in opposition, it just went to the column that says commented are.
Okay. Yes, that is a good discussion. I mean, just speaking for myself, my preference would be to not note whether they're in favor or in opposition, but simply that they comment. Because there are often people who say, I like this part, but I don't like that part. And what's important is that they comment and we absorb their comments and then we hopefully make use of them. So I always thought that it was kind of difficult and anachronistic to say somebody was put them in a box in favor or put them in a box in opposition to. So I would just just note the people who commented.
And I guess I don't have a problem with that as long as that's consistent. So we don't mark people
Yes, I agree.
favor, but not in opposition. Okay, so we can
Wait,
decide under miscellany
Diane,
whether to change that or not.
Diane. Oh, sorry, Diane. In defense, I sent you an email, and this is Tammy. I'm sorry.
No.
If it's not clear to me that they're in opposition, I don't put it in the minutes because I don't want to say they're in opposition or in favor. So I put commented on so that it's the minutes at least are accurate. So we had that discussion by email.
Yep.
And I agree with Mr. Wallman. If that's an issue, then we just remove those two columns and just put that they commented.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes. Put into red the recommendations that we make to the council. There were 3, and also that we eliminate the in favor of or in opposition to, and we simply note who commented.
All right.
Second that motion.
I'll withdraw my motion previously.
Okay. Any more discussion on this?
I think also there was a comment that the Planning Commission continued the application to August 23rd. I just thought we should be consistent and say it because it's really not an application. When we were discussing the maritime legislation, just say we continued the review of the legislation instead of the application.
Yes, I'll accept that. Yeah, okay, that clarifies that. Given that, is any more discussion? Okay, call for a vote. All in favor of approving the minutes as we just amended them, please say aye.
Aye.
Any nays?
I'll abstain since I wasn't at the meeting, but I did watch it, for what it's worth.
Well, then you get it. Okay, I'm not sure how you get a chance to.
Well,
vote.
in that case, I would have vote. I would have vote to approve.
Okay, I'm going to hand the gavel back to Mr. Sale.
Oh, rats. It was going so well. As I open up many files, my apologies. Okay, that takes care of that item, and we will display the agenda here for you and move right along to the next item. There we go, so the public can see it. Minutes are done. Now we move on to findings. The site design plan review application for 414 to 416 3rd Street, and then ordinance 01921. 01921, I'll bring that up as well. Other one. Did anyone have any issues with what was emailed out by our staff with the opinion and order for the residential neighborhood site design plan review, or the other one first?
Well, I'll move to approve the findings for the 414 3rd and 415 3rd Streets.
And I'll bring those up real quick because I have those for display.
And I will second that motion.
Okay, we have a first and a second.
Mr. Iams seconded.
Okay, any discussion on it? This is it right here.
No, but I have something funny to say about it.
You do.
The house is for sale. I just passed it this morning. I said, what? And the people are actually just moving across the street.
Things take time, don't they? So I have no further comment on the item, and everyone has seen this already. So any other further issues? Okay, we'll call for the vote then. All those in favor of the opinion order say aye.
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 Any of those say nay or abstain? I'm an aye as well.
I'll send that around. This is Chris Beard, counsel. I'll send that out to planning and zoning with authority to sign your names.
Thank you. And there it is for the public's quick review. And it's also online for the public to look at.
Well, this is 01921.
I'm looking, I'm moving on to. Okay, and we can go back to,
We had it.
no. That's it.
Yes, that we just approved.
Right. Not, I thought you said you wanted to look at it again. You said just had it.
No,
Assuming you want to look at that again.
no.
Good. We'll move back to where I was going. There was some slight red recommended, as you can see down.
Okay, I would move to, I think that what, one thing needs to be done is in this, the middle bullet recommendation is,
Right there.
it should include community concerns, should be in red as well. That's all. Very simple edit to typographical error.
And my edit said that right under that, instead of the word should be made part of the written record,
No, it's shall.
shall be made part of
You
the.
recommended a shall.
Yes.
Okay, with and those were the only other edits I received from commissioners. Anything else?
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second that motion. All those in, any discussion further
Well, we're making a motion to approve with the changes.
Yes.
with the
Yes.
modifications, correct?
Thank you, Mr. Iams.
All those in favor to approve with the modifications so presented, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I'll abstain. I was not at either meeting that this was discussed. The two I've missed in 2 years.
Not a bad deal.
We had quorums.
That's correct. All right, that takes care of all the findings, and now we can move on to old business and public hearings. I want to double check with Dr. Nash for the flow of this and who's present. Is there anything that we need to change from who's present and who's not here?
No, but I did just want to make sure I could sign for you the findings.
Yes, absolutely.
And what
Standard.
else should be read? As well as a discussion of benefits?
Yes, both concerns and benefits should be highlighted.
Okay. Let's see. Right, so you're up to, there was some question of whether you closed the public hearing on the maritime ordinance. I understood that you had closed the public hearing.
I objected, and so I had several people actually ask me, without telling me the substance of what they wanted to say, but asked me at a recent picnic about whether the hearing was closed, and I said it wasn't. They saw the agenda and said it was. So I'm sure there was complete, confusion over that, because I guess when we said, when Ben said it was closed and I objected, there wasn't any further comment at the end about whether it was closed or not. So of course
I thought I heard Ben say, well, I've closed the public record.
and then I said I object. And then after that, I kept talking, and then we went through a bunch of things. And then at the end, they didn't ever say.
No,
so
I think I thought I could have misheard, but I thought I heard Ben say after all of that, well, I've closed it.
Let me clarify it for you. It was closed in my mind because we'd closed it and we'd heard it for 2 meetings in a row. And we heard your objection. And if there was anything provided by the public, you could always submit that, and it could go along with the package after this, because public hearing in effect is never closed for an item as it proceeds through the chain of command here. In the process.
Mr. Chair, we did receive 3 comments, I think, and I let them know to forward their comments to City Council to make sure they saw them.
Which is good. So we still accept comments in through planning and zoning, and that is the process Sally just laid out as we're executing. It goes on, and still their comments are alive with the City Council. So, and if you've heard something outside in regards to this, hopefully you're not talking to them directly, because then
No, I mean, as I just said, not about the substance. They were just asking about procedure. And since there was some confusion, I just said, if you have any comments, I don't know whether it's open or closed. I was under the impression it was not closed. So anyway, it did lead to some confusion, but since those comments can still go on to City Council.
they will.
It's not the end of the world.
That is correct. That is correct. Thank you for that.
Chair
And-
Sal, I need to know if I should note that in the August 5th minutes, because I didn't catch it. And I apologize, I didn't catch it.
Oh,
But you didn't mention it the other way either.
I didn't mention it at all because
Right.
it was kind of confusing and I wasn't clear, so I didn't put them in the minutes. So if the meeting, if it's closed, then I'd like to go ahead and amend the minutes to make sure it's indicated in there.
Okay, well, we'll backtrack then. For the minutes, we do have a modification that we'd like to now add on as a notation. It wasn't said either way, I was fine with it, but now if we want to add that to the minutes, and I think it is pertinent, so I will make a motion that we add to the minutes that we had just approved, that we state that we had actually closed the public hearing.
second.
So second, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any
I'm gonna
opposed?
abstain just because I had objected during the whole thing.
Oh,
So.
you can oppose. It's no big deal. I mean, it's a vote.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what happened, what you said. So I don't want to oppose what happened. I just want to abstain from the vote since. Anyway.
Okay, fair enough. And therefore we have one abstention and it passes. It'll be so amended. Thank you, Tammy.
Thank you.
We have so much work we've been knocking out every 2 weeks here. We're gonna flail at some point and mess up some things and get them corrected. So it's glad we're slowing it down a second and getting things right. Thanks, Tammy. Okay.
Thank you.
And then Chairman Sale, my only other thing before you start your deliberations is I was wondering if you could separate out the plan from the ordinance. First, hopefully, what we're looking for is an endorsement of the plan. And then we're hoping that's a shorter discussion, and then move on to the ordinance to discuss some of the amendments that have been circulating.
Okay, so moving into the old business for ordinance 02521 waterfront maritime zoning districts, the uses for the purpose of requiring certain annual reporting on maritime and non-maritime uses, ... We have continued this item from the last meeting, and we had closed the public hearing and we were on to deliberations amongst the commissioners. And we had begun to look at the recommendations that were presented by Mr. Waldman that were fed through to the commission via email and also posted to us. So we started that talk and ran out of time and decided we would continue the ordinance for 02521 till this point, which would make us still in deliberations after public comment by the commissioners. Dr. Nash has requested that we look at this item as a binary item with the plan and then the legislation, and would like us as a commission to either endorse, not endorse, or recommend modification to the plan, and also approval of the ordinance. Obviously, as it's coming to us, business, it is surely an ordinance that we're handling and voting upon. The plan being separate, Dr. Nash would like it stated whether we approve of the plan as it is or think it needs some work or have any comment to that. So that kind of breaks us into two issues. And you could go down a long way with either one. We are going to continue down the long way with the recommendations. But Dr. Nash, are you just looking for a approval or a sign of happiness or a hope for change and comment with our overall recommendations with it, or?
Right. I'm trying to get a sense of, you feel like the plan is going in the right direction. You like it. You like what it's saying. You're going to endorse it. And the plan gets implemented in different ways, a variety of different ways. One of the ways the plan gets implemented is through an ordinance such as the one before you. If there's issues with the ordinance, I kind of want to separate that out. So you can say, we like the plan, it's going the right direction, but the way you're implementing it here specifically needs a few tweaks.
Okay.
Dr. Nash, does the study or the plan, as you say, is that going to become a part of the comprehensive plan in any way?
Right, it will become an appendix to our new comprehensive plan.
Okay. So there's some consequence to what we do tonight.
That's right.
Okay,
But just to put a finer
And just
point,
to clarify, in order for the council, I think the planning commission under state code does have to make a definitive recommendation on a portion of the comp plan, a sector study or a study like this, in order for the planning commission to then approve it. So I think
well, that's kind of what I was getting at. Is this
right.
Does this carry the same weight as something like the sector study, which technically would in and of itself be passed as a resolution?
an item, yes.
Mhm.
It seems like we're kind of, with your request, Dr. Nash, it seems like we're in kind of a no man's land. It doesn't seem like this has the weight of a sector study that's going to go to city council with the resolution to adopt it. Not and I don't sort of disagree with the idea of us separating the ordinance and comments about the plan, whether we think it's going in the right direction. I just want to make sure that it's put in the right context.
Right. Well, as you kind of touch on, we got things a little out of order with this, and ideally there would have been a resolution. So there was a resolution for the task force, but then there probably should have been a resolution or an ordinance to adopt the plan as an amendment to a comp plan. And the idea was always to include it in our new comp plan, but that is obviously not adopted yet. So, hopefully in a few months, this will be included in the new comp plan and it will all be adopted together, again, approved by you and then city council. Then it will have the full force of a comprehensive plan.
Okay, so procedurally, I mean, conceptually, it's really no different than a sector study. It's the same weight as a sector study, just due to circumstances, procedurally is being handled differently.
That's right.
Okay.
I think we should definitely have the ordinance
If I could
first.
just add that there should have been a resolution at council to endorse the plan. There will be I believe it'll be the 13th or whenever the meeting in September is. And in theory, the plan should come before the ordinance. So we were just asking that the commission endorse, and like I said, it's actually a strategy as opposed to a plan, but that you endorse the strategy before you go into the details of the ordinance, which is one of 3 implementing actions.
How much do you see this plan being modified by the group, Ms. Fogarty, in the near term of months?
I do not expect to see modification to the plan. There are a couple of technical things. One of the council members have brought up adding a chart that includes the water access percentage as well as the triggers, but we do not anticipate modifications to the plan.
So basically, like when we do a sector study, the money and the process you have for developing what you're being paid to develop is at its end for development almost, right? That is pretty much it. It's just the implementation of the legislative acts which we're starting. So, yes.
So, does that mean things like the enterprise fund that we're basically trying to get that off the ground rather than kick the can down the road? That's not going to be incorporated in the.
No, let me be very clear. Diane asks a good question. There are 3 implementing actions. One is the enterprise fund. And when we go back to council, we will be very, very clear that you have the enterprise fund that is cross-referenced in the ordinance, and it's also in the plan. The second is the water access plan. We are meeting in the next week with the National Park Service. The water access plan, my understanding, will be underway, and there's a commitment for it to be underway by January 1, 2022. And the third is the zoning ordinance. So each 3 have equal weight for implementing this Maritime Task Force strategy.
And the only difference is that with the enterprise fund, rather than just being cross-referenced, I thought there was a proposal to try to make sure there's a mechanism structured, a mechanism for actually beginning the enterprise fund rather than sort of just saying to city council, we want you to do it. So in other words, I thought we were saying some of the
so there will be, Diane, there will be references that specifically what we have discussed is that none of the non-maritime uses will be allowed to take place until the enterprise fund is up and running and until fees associated with that fund have been paid.
Okay.
So all of that will take place.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, procedurally, in my mind, from the way I interpret things, there's nothing that stops legislation from being submitted up the chain, whether it's in regards to a strategic plan or not, and they can be handled separately. So if we start to go down the plan road to go over our endorsement and look at that, that could drag us down from what we've already been submitted first, which is the legislation. So I recommend that we go through the legislation, the recommendations, and then we could talk about the plan. Do any commissioners have an issue with that? Because the plan could go down a lot further rat holes than what we have now.
Well, I don't see rat holes.
I don't either.
We've had 3 presentations on this strategic plan, and I mean, I've read it, almost all of it, and I endorse it, and it informs the ordinance that we're about to look at.
Yeah, I
So-
think as a strategy document, I endorse it too.
Yeah, it's more of a strategy document than anything. I don't think we can, I mean, I can't say that I feel like it's, I don't know. It's
Well,
just,
I'm hearing what I want to hear. Okay, we have been presented it 3 times, and then it change if you're able to attend their meetings. So it's been presented in final form to us with slight modification as it goes up the chain, as it usually does. I'm happy with it as the plan. I endorse it myself. We can make them add that to our recommendations or make a motion of endorsement or not. If you guys want to do that, please present it. It sounds like we would be able to do that. So we can go ahead and do that first then, in my opinion. I just didn't think that it would be this easy.
Well, I'll make a motion that we endorse the task force strategic plan with the added advisory recommendation that all 3 of the implementations need to be passed in order for it to function well.
Okay, and any further changes, I'd like to see any changes that come after this be presented back to us by staff as it goes up the chain, so we're informed of, because we'll know that whether a recommendation is going to be standing with something we like or don't like.
Okay.
I'd like to add that to the modification, which kind of goes without saying. So I'll second your motion with the addition of any changes to the plan after this should be presented back to the commission through staff, which is an easy thing to do.
Okay. I'll accept that.
Any further discussion on that second? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Any abstentions? The recommendation passes. Congratulations, Dr. Nash, Ms. Fogarty. You have a recommendation of approval of the plan as stated with amendments.
I should add Eric Lashinsky to those congratulations.
We should, yes, Eric, my apologies. I was waiting to hear some yoo-hoos or hoorays, but evidently everybody likes
Thank you.
me
Thank you all.
to dry. Very dry night. It's Monday.
We are thrilled and delighted because the action you just took is the culmination of all the efforts going back to October with the creation of the task force. This is the real product of the task force. So thank you on behalf of the task force. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome. And if I know it had been that big of a deal, we would have had champagne and fireworks with it. But we've been beat over the head with the plan for the last 6 months. So we were lacking that. Do you have anything else to say, Councilman?
Oh, maybe this is comic relief, but I just wanted you to know that per our 4620, the resolution that established the task force says that the task force does expire September 30th. So that all works out.
There you go. That's good. That's good. That makes a lot of sense there.
Yeah, it just disappears. No. Congratulations, Eileen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. All right, well, then we'll move on to the actual recommendations that we have, and I'll go ahead and open those up.
Mr. Sale, how would you like to proceed from here?
I'd like to take the recommendations that you sent out, and also we have comments from the others. Obviously, we're just going to bring them up and go through the comments line by line. You probably have a better, more efficient way. I mean, you are the master.
Can I share the screen and can I?
You want to do that? I'll stop sharing. You can take it. Go ahead.
All right. Okay, I got to figure it out.
No worries.
Share screen. Okay, how are we looking?
Looks good.
Okay. Folks, if you recall, I went fairly quickly through these last time. Since then, I've had the opportunities to consult with staff and to tighten up, to make some changes. So these are actually revised from last time. There's a couple of new things. There's a couple of things that have been taken out, but generally they're tightened up, all with an eye towards making this legislation better and making it begin to achieve the goals in that strategic task force strategic planning that we just endorsed. So, with your permission, and hopefully I won't be too boring, I'd like to go through them one by one. I'm going to suggest that what we do is we can go through them, and after I go through them, I guess we all can decide how we want to deal with them. But one of the things that I strongly recommend is that the reasonings in these little outline prefatory remarks to each of these recommendations be included in our findings, because we want to make this as useful to the members of the city council as we can make them. And I think just tossing a recommendation in front of them without our reasoning behind it is going to be not as effective as if we included all of it. So that's going to be, at the end, depending on whether we decide to vote on each one of them, or depending on whether we decide to vote on them as a whole. But in any case, that these prefatory remarks and arguments and facts be included. The first one has actually changed a little bit from last time. It sort of started off with a rifle blast last time and said, got to be public access every time there's anything. But what really makes sense, given that boatyards can be dangerous places that the public cannot just wander about, it makes sense to tie up public access to the waterfront, general public access, to situations where the landowner opens the property up for public access for a restaurant, for instance, or retail shopping and so forth. So if the landowner decides to open up the property to the general public as customers, right? He invites them on. Then under those circumstances, the public should be required to provide public access generally. So if he's going to open it up for some, he's going to open it up for all. And this, I think, should not be difficult or impossible for landowners to provide this. Now, one of the things that I do talk about is I define public access. I try to give it some definitions, some concreteness. Some of the minimal requirements, and then under D, things are a little more vague, because there are situations where public access may not be possible for some reason, and somebody needs to make that decision. And our director of planning and zoning, or the Department of Planning and Zoning, should make that decision, and then I think that the council should really begin to consider what commitments to funding should be required under those, I think, very unique and rare circumstances. I think that the legislation talks for about $125,000. I think that's a minimal amount for a lifetime of benefits, but we've got to provide some flexibility under those very rare circumstances where public access may not be permitted at all. So let me talk a little bit in the recommendations. I try to make it clear. Anytime that there's a non-maritime retail establishment, not limited to restaurants, open to the general off-site public at Shorrock public access, it's defined. I also make reference to this Maryland recreational use statute, and I at the risk of boring you, I'd like to bring it up just one more time. There's this statute in the Maryland Annotated Code, and it says that if a landowner opens up his property for free for recreational or educational uses, very broadly defined. What happens is that his liability drops from what's known as a negligence standard of care, pretty high, to what's known as a trespasser standard of care, which is pretty low. In other words, if you walk on the property, you do it at your own risk. And so I don't want to hear, if we define and include this kind of this recreational use statute in the change in liabilities, we don't have to listen to these complaints about, oh, my insurance is going to go up because it shouldn't. Okay? So I just want to define it, and I think that making it a general proposition, that when you open it up for some, you're going to open it up for all. And obviously, daylight hours, spatial limits, blah, blah, blah. Okay? That's number one. Number two, and this is enforcement. How do we enforce all of this stuff? And in the proposed amendments that Mr. Fogarty and Eric Lashinsky brought to us a few months ago, they increased the strength of the enforcement mechanisms considerably. But those enforcement mechanisms only address the increase in taxes and I believe the reporting requirements and so forth. But what if an owner begins to deny or inhibit in some way public accesses? Can that same enforcement mechanism then begin to take away whatever benefits that landowner has gained by virtue of the incentive system or the trigger or retention bonus system, as we rename it? Let's add public access into the enforcement mechanism. And just simply by adding it and not creating a whole new system, okay? And then thirdly, there's the general question, what if an owner's not in compliance when they're applying for incentives? And there's a lot of questions about that. I think Ms. Butler has got some ideas that she'll be presenting to you when I'm done. So what's the recommendation? The failure to provide public access shall be the same cause for mandatory revocation of the occupancy permits, okay, which are issued under this new regime. And just as exceeding the non-maritime limits is also mandatory cause for revocation. That's all it says. We just add some language into those enforcement clauses in the amendments which have been brought to us, and off we go. We're beginning to put some teeth into public access. Okay, the incentives for gaining meaningful public access must be increased. Many people have said this to me, and from many different directions. The way that the incentive system is presented to us in the legislation, it makes these incentives too small to generate anything. And there certainly are some incentives that are worth more than others, okay? So one of the ways to do it is to increase these worth more incentives, the category 2 or tier 2 or whatever incentives, increase them to 10%. So you can increase your non-maritime space to, not just 5%, but 10%. Now you're looking at a change, okay? So then what are you going to, what are we going to get in return for that change to the property owner? I have been focusing in on one incentive that I think is of super importance, and that is shared parking. There is one property owner that I know of who could absolutely benefit from what I'm proposing here in terms of shared parking. And that is, frankly, the Annapolis City Marina. It's the only one I know who's got over 125, 150, maybe even close to 200 spaces. I was, as a footnote, I must say, a little amazed that the lawyer for that client was unable to provide us with the number of parking spaces that are, frankly, undercover. They're underneath that building. But anecdotally, I have some idea of what there may be. What do I mean by shared parking? Nights and weekends, when it's not being used by office by the office tenants. Okay, and we have shared parking defined in the code. It's been granted to other properties, and we have some experience with shared parking. And finally, with 150 spaces into effect, the street life and the parking life in Eastport. It will become a important component of a permit parking system if that's where those residents decide to go. But in any case, even before then, you could have restaurant customers, you could have restaurant employees, you could have people who take nighttime cruises, you have all kinds of businesses using that shared parking, removing well over 100 parking cars off the street when residents need that parking. Now, one of the problems, well, let's define what we mean. 150 spaces, right? Not just 25 or 50 or 75, but nearly all of the spaces that are available, number one. Number two, a fee can be charged. I think that we should require that it be a reasonable fee and not a $45 a night fee. And that we set some formula for what a reasonable fee is. And frankly, the Knighton Garage up West Street is about the same distance from the city dock downtown as the city marina is. So if you charge the same thing that the Knighton Garage is charging, that by definition would be reasonable. You could do all sorts of other things with this shared parking, requiring employees to use it and so forth. But I want to remind you that a fee can be charged, and you do not need to pay somebody to be there in today's world. You have a machine that issues a ticket and accepts your payment on the way out. And so this is a revenue stream which is not being realized now. I cannot, by the way, think of any other property other than the city marina that could qualify for this, what I'm going to propose is a very generous incentive. That very generous incentive, okay, may take that one zone, WMM, over the 50% line that people have somehow drawn in the sand as being the minimal requirement for a maritime zone. That it'll be no more than 50% non-maritime uses. Well, frankly, the city marina is the only property that I can think of that's like pure office building and that would be able to provide shared parking. Maybe there are others on the other side in WME, but they're going to be much smaller. Let's get some experience with this, and even then they might be helpful. But let's start with this. So this is not something that's going to be, everybody's going to rush in to take advantage of. It's only the one property that I can think of that it really affects, but it could have great consequences. So providing shared parking, at least 150 spaces, reasonable rates, and allow them to expand 10%. And if that takes them over 50%, frankly, personally, I think that should be permitted. That does not apply in the other two zones, WME or in WMI. Only in WMM, and that's the City Marina, Cardi Templeton, whatever it's called. I never can remember the names of these places because I don't use them. And then there are only three places, real properties along WMM and the zones are different. What's going on Spa Creek is a little bit different than what's going on Back Creek, and is certainly different from what's going on the other side of Back Creek. So, you need to treat, and sometimes you need to treat everybody with a totally equal hand, but in other cases, these zones are somewhat different. Okay, for instance, large restaurants in WME. The council should not permit large restaurants in WME, okay? WME is surrounded, almost every property there is in fairly close contact with residences, which are proximately or actually rubbing up against their boundaries. There are properties in WME in which the noise from a restaurant would project across the waters and really subject a lot of residents up and down Spa Creek especially to noises of restaurant, even though they're physically fairly far away. Now, that's really not true so much in WMI, but frankly, you might think about it because there are people who live all along the WME waterfront facing across Back Creek to WMI. But in any case, I think that WME is the one where there should be a real resistance, firm, total resistance to allowing large restaurants in WME. I think that we've got some we're going to get some experience with rooftop dining, which we permitted years ago downtown in City Dock, as somebody finally rents the old Faucets building. And I have my fears that rooftop dining is going to really be deleterious to lifestyle of many people who live around there. But in any case, rooftop dining should not be allowed in any restaurant anywhere in the 3 maritime zones. There are just too many people. They're on the water and too many people involved. The patio dining is fine, and I suggest, as somewhere else suggested, that any restaurant, any property owner who applies for a restaurant in WME has to go for a special exception, so that somebody looks at this, somebody neutral looks at it and decides whether they should be permitted by looking at, and let's set some standards for the Board of Appeals so that they're not just out there in space, but they have, in this case, 6 things that they can begin to look at to decide whether to permit the restaurant. The proximity to existing restaurants, proximity to existing residents, the availability of the parking situation, their hours, the rooftop dining, and the noise across the water. So I think that we should keep it the same as it is now, no more than 2,000 square feet. No rooftop dining, no outdoor amplified music, okay? And give these standards to the Board of Appeals. So that might resolve some future problems if things are very clear, and if the line is held at 2,000 square feet restaurant, is that's not just a lunch counter. That's a restaurant. 4,000 square feet's a big restaurant, but 2,000 square feet, you can deal with it. You can make some money with 2,000 square foot restaurant. Somebody brought up the notion of events and whether events should be permitted. Events such as weddings, corporate events, conferences, different kinds of events. I suggest a number of things. Parking. Parking should be, first of all, the events are permitted or not, they're permitted by the Department of P&Z in these cases. And that there should be some attention given to parking. So, if they can't provide on or off-site parking, and boy, the shared parking could be useful, couldn't it? But if they can or they can't, they must have a good reason and some way to deal with people getting back and forth to these events, and convince the Department of Planning and Zoning that it can go forward without inconveniencing everybody in the area. And I think that the event should be conclude all amplified sounds and loud music, but I'm willing to play with that as to what people are willing to live with. But it's a recommendation. But the events be permitted. These landowners have asked for, quote, flexibilities. This is one way that they can have flexibilities. So that we limit them to days. There must be a permit. They must look at parking. I'm not stuck on 25 to 30% of the expected attendees, but they're usually 2 or 3 people to a car. Come on. But I even allow that there's some events which cannot and should not be expected to provide parking, and they can be granted an exemption, by the Department of P&Z. And I'm concerned about amplified sounds going on too late and so forth and so on. And all of that should be included in the conditions of the permit. Okay. Funding. Now, there's funding mechanism which is suggested by the strategy of the task force, and that those funds which are to be raised from the increased assessments of properties who've taken advantage of this increased use of non-maritime uses all goes towards an industry fund to fund, salesmanship of Annapolis to the maritime industry generally. It's a good idea. Okay, some dedicated funding stream for keeping track of this and for economic development. But wait a minute, what about the public access? What's going to happen with funding the things which this water access plan is going to reveal. It's going to reveal that there are all sorts of places in the city which could become public access, but which require some funding. So what could be a substantial and resilient and what's the word I'm looking for, sustainable funding source? Well, one of the comments that was submitted to us said that, you know, Annapolis is permitted to impose not only a hotel tax, but a tax on boats. And so what I'm proposing is something which may not necessarily go into this legislation, but it is an idea which we need to plant the seed for, so that in the future, in the next council perhaps, somebody come, you know, this is brought to the floor, and there is a reasonable, and I'm talking 15, no more than $15 or $20 per boat, that's collected by the slip landlord or the boatel storage landlord or whomever, and that dedicated that source of funds is dedicated to public access. And I'm going to be, I don't know that this is the time to, you know, try to jam this in there, but this is the way you're going to fund public access in the future. Very modest fee. And I also include, because I had one of our commissioners, Mr. Pline, said, well, what about all those guys who've got a little boat down at SSA or EYC or AYC or all over the place? Does it include a kayak? Does it include, you know, little racing boats that only two people go on, so forth and so on? There was a very, very well taken comment. What I'm suggesting is that any boat that's either in a slip in the water, in a boatel, or on a trailer which is road ready, in other words, can be moved around on the streets, it's big enough that it's on a trailer and can be moved, those are the boats that should become subject to this public water access fund.
One comment on that, Bob, and
yes, sir.
We can talk about it later. Is I have a better suggestion than the one that you made.
Okay, well, let's do that when we get to that, because you know, I'm throwing this out there as, you know, how can it be made better? All right. Some people have talked about, they're very concerned about this legislation, and it should be sunsetted at some point. There's another prong to that, and that is a lot of people have said, well, let's require that it at least be reevaluated at 5 years. And there's got to be some place, we got to figure out a way to keep an eye on this to see how it's working. And certainly the mechanism that was proposed is that the information, the data which is collected, be brought at least to the Planning Commission once a year, so that we can see kind of what's going on. And hopefully there'll be enough, you know, people who be on long enough on the commission so that they have some institutional memory. But we need to figure out a way to like make sure that it gets reevaluated in 5 years, and that the efforts that are required are made to make the legislation better, especially if issues of public access have arisen, or lack of public access. So you can't really sunset it because you'll get chaos. But you can mandate a reevaluation, and you can now fund the reevaluation, or at least require a funding, or I'm not quite sure how to do that legislatively. But the point being is that now we make it clear that it has to be done within the legislation. And I will leave it to legislative drafters to come up with the right way to do it, but it needs to be in the legislation, and the reevaluation and the money for a reevaluation needs to be in the legislation. Now, another comment that was made is, what do we want from the public water access plan? I've done a lot of talking about public access to the water, and I think that we have to keep in mind that although there may be several thousand boats in the water, that doesn't represent but a very small percentage of the many, many, many more thousands of people who live in the city of Annapolis with all these miles of coastline and still can't get to the water to hang out. Okay, so that's been one of my goals in all of this. So let's look at this public water access plan, which sounds to me like it's really going to happen. So I simply propose a number of goals. I want to make sure that they include not only existing, but also potential sites. And the inventory should include what each site needs. And what I'd really like to get is some cost, general approximate costs, but be nice, okay? Would great to know what the options for these various sites, and many of them are not really the Eastport Street End parks or the Murray Hill Street End parks, but there are other places in the city in which there's some potential for meaningful public access, but it's going to require some money. I would ask the Public Water Access Plan to look at funding options, to keep these ideas of how do we pay for it alive, and finally saying, look, it should not be delayed. This needs to start and needs to get going and be done within a year and a half. Great, okay? So this is, what's the word I'm looking at? No, it's not advisory, not celebratory, it's hortatory. That's a fancy legal word, meaning encouragement. It's encouraging the council to push this. Finally, a couple of people in their comments raised some of these questions. I didn't go into them into the weeds. Something about defining transient boater services. The definition of public access very much needs to be clarified and made very specific. And a couple of minor things to adding sail repair is one of the legitimate boatyard activities. Pump out is, you're going to hear from Miss Butler in a minute about pump outs and how do we encourage pump outs? How do we not go beyond encouraging, but what can we do to make sure that pump outs are retained? Okay. I'm going to suggest they be incentives. Meaningful incentives. Category 2, the higher tier of incentives, but maybe not, because I don't really know what the economics of these things are. I'm told that if you run a pump out station, you get money from the DNR, so maybe they don't need such a great incentive. But in any case, and finally, something words have meaning. I've said too many of them, but it was pointed out by Mr. Arnett that you change the word trigger, which implies a new thing, but actually what we're looking at is currently operating boatyards, for instance. We've been using the term trigger, but really what they are is it's a bonus for retaining those activities. So let's change anywhere in the legislation that says trigger, change it to retention bonus. It's much clearer, it's much more accurate, it's much more correct. All right, I've said enough. Would you like to go back through each of these and make some comments? I'll take some notes. I'll do anything that the chairman tells me to do.
Well, since I piped in, I could make a comment on the one area about the boatel tax.
Let me get to it so that we can take a look at it.
And it mostly has to do with getting down to smaller boats.
Okay.
Because I think, you're going to run into okay, somebody has a kayak, but it's on a trailer. Is that, so my thought,
okay,
I'm with you on the idea.
Mm-hmm.
Would be basically anything that's titled by a state entity. So if it has the MD numbers on it, or the WI if it's from Wisconsin,
so any boat registered with the Department of Natural Resources.
Yeah, in any state.
Okay.
So basically, if you've got a small boat that's a kayak or something that doesn't have to have a title, then that's something that's just too small in the noise.
I got you.
And I think it would be really hard to actually identify all those watercraft. So I agree.
Yeah.
So all boats registered with DNR. Is it basically
with the state entity, any state entity, because maybe somebody's got it registered in Massachusetts and they happen to have it on here, so it can't just be Maryland.
So any boat registered with the Maryland Department of
with any state entity. Whatever the right wording is
Or
there.
any other state registry system. How's that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. No,
Okay.
no, I like that. It's a very clear, firm definition. It helps. I like that. Okay. And we don't want the little ones. You're right. We just want the bigger boats, you know. And okay, great. I made that note. I will accept that amendment to, you know, that change to this. Let's see, on all, so this goes out, let me see. Okay, let me get rid of that. And, whoops, let me get rid of, all. Is that acceptable, Mr. Plying?
Sure.
Okay.
And then the other thing was, and this is just a general comment on it, not necessarily suggesting you change it, but it had to do with the reasonable fee and your comparison to Night and Garage. While I appreciate the thought there, I don't know that that's the right metric. Because, you know, Eastport, while you comparing Eastport to downtown, I mean, it's its own little special issue, I think. And the fact that it's sort of disconnected from relating to downtown per se, I think it's more about dealing with demand for people using restaurants on 4th Street or other reasons somebody might want to park in Eastport, you know, Wednesday night sailing, Thursday night sailing, all of those other reasons people park there. Those aren't really relevant to downtown. So the comparison to Knighton, I'm not sure works, but.
Well, I compare it to Knighton because Knighton is also peripheral to downtown.
Well, my point is that I don't think that the parking pressure in Eastport is peripheral to downtown. I think it's its own problem.
Right, that's what I mean. And it's same with the Knighton Garage. It's not really affected by downtown parking pressures. And I only
okay, fair enough. Anyway, it's
how could we define a reasonable fee then?
I don't have a better suggestion. That's why I was a little hesitant to bring it up. But
so
you know.
I purposely said that a reasonable fee may be defined as
that's fine.
I'm waffling, but purposely waffling. Okay,
Yeah,
I'm just trying to throw out an idea.
No, I think it, and it's valid just as a bogey. I think it's fine.
I hear you.
Yeah.
I'd love to get another way though, of, you know, getting a clear what reasonable means. Lawyers are always searching for that, whatever the hell that means, and they're always using that term. Any other comments?
I have some comments, a couple things that just kind of struck me.
Thank you.
You've given a lot of information here. So what really stood out to me is one that's really concerned me is the sound and the proximity to other section 4 really. You say the proximity to existing restaurants and residents. You know, again, there are other issues. There are other businesses that can be affected. We brought this up with the nightmare that's happening at the Indianapolis Summer Garden Theater, where all the best intentions were there, but right now they're really kind of concerned about what's going to happen at Fawcett's and how it's going to hurt, how that and whatever's happening on City Dock is going to hurt the Indianapolis Summer Garden Theater. So there are other things that you have to be aware of. Also, the fact that the noise ordinances, you might want to, in some of the areas, I do think that special exception does need to be done, but you might want to refer to section 11, where it talks about DBA, about the how loud it can be and the hours and the difference between 10, they call nighttime 10 o'clock in section 11. So they do spell it out there.
What's section 11?
Section 11 of the city code.
Oh, okay.
The city code. And it talks about what the, and how loud it can be as well. There are some things, but I do think it needs to be a special exception. I do think that we don't take things in consideration. I think limiting to existing restaurants and residents is not enough. I think it needs to be, it could be other entities that may be affected. And so that's kind of my main thing is we've gotten in trouble with this summer garden theater, and that everybody has best intentions, but it looks like it's whatever's happening right now is going to threaten the summer garden theater immensely. It may.
Okay, so two good points you've made. The first one, though, you suggest including not just existing restaurants, but how a new restaurant may affect other businesses.
Other businesses that may be detrimentally affected.
Did my addition of these two words and businesses?
That's fine. That works.
Okay. And now the other thing that you're suggesting is that we look to the existing Annapolis code on noise.
Yeah, as a guideline, existing code, I think it's 1112 or 1114 in the city code, talks about noise ordinances and peaceful. Let me see if I can get into it. I think it's 1112. It's 11. I think it's 1114. Maybe not. It's. I thought it was an 11 somewhere.
So you're recommending that the council consider importing into this legislation a reference
the guidelines to the timing and the noise. That, I mean, the biggest issue is, I mean, it all might be a moot point because the biggest issue is comes down to enforcement, and nobody enforces how loud things can be ever, or how long they can go on for. And I've noticed that for years, that's not been enforced in the city. So, I mean, it might all be a moot point, but, it should be in there at least. It's 1112 the city, 1112 120, 11.12.120. Those are the two things that really stand out for me.
So you're suggesting that we add that, okay? Okay.
Use that as a guideline, at least as far as the hours go, instead of just arbitrarily saying 10:30.
Okay. So the existing code sections should become a part of the special exception conditions of approval.
Yeah.
Okay, I hear you.
I mean, there are other parts that can be applied if it's detrimental to business.
I got you.
Okay.
No, good. Thank you. Good. Sure. I think it's good. Anything else now? Come on.
I mean, that goes to events.
I feel like I'm in,
section 5 is maybe where you want to put that.
What's also in 5?
Yeah, where it says the sound shall cease by 10:30. I don't know if you want to spell that time out if we already have a noise limitation. I hate to say you can have amplified music without having, these are the limits of what it should be.
I'm going to do exactly the same thing almost. How's that? Can you see that, David?
Well, you still have the word 10:30 in there up above that you don't really need.
And what's your comment about that?
Well, I don't know if you want to put 10:30 in if you're going to be trying to stop things at 10 o'clock. I don't know.
Oh, I see. Because why? What is 10 o'clock? Is that in the
10 o'clock is the time when the city says you got to turn it down.
Oh, it does.
And the fact is nobody enforces that in the city. And if you don't put 10 o'clock in there, I don't know if there'll be anything.
Is that a part of the code section, the noise section?
Yeah, it's 11.12.120.
Okay, and it's 10 o'clock.
10 o'clock, you put it down to a different decibel level.
Got you. Okay, fine. Well, you can always, right.
I'm just saying, you just might want to refer to that section 11.12.120.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Sure.
Good. Very good. I like that. Because I'm always concerned about putting these specifics in, like this parking business, but,
I'm just trying to be consistent there.
Yeah, got it. Okay, right, and to be consistent. Okay. Ms. Butler?
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to first say thanks for entertaining some of these started out as amendments to the actual ordinance in terms of really just trying to draft the language, but I was convinced that
So wait a
I
minute,
should.
wait a minute, are you commenting on what we've just done, or are you moving on?
Oh, I was moving on. I don't really have,
If I may, could I just make a
Sure.
request of the chair? Could we talk about these things and vote on these things and then move on to Ms. Butler's? Just so we keep things clear? So
You can do it in one by one or the whole. I'd suggest the whole. Everybody's had a chance to go through and nobody's objected to their changes. So why not go as a whole?
fine.
I'd make a
More than
motion
happy do
to,
that. I
make
make
a
a
motion to
motion.
adopt, well, I'll make the
Excuse me?
motion to adopt this document as amended.
I'll second
Well,
that
this
motion.
document, I just did it. It's right in front of you. I made the
Right.
changes that everybody said, so it's this document, right?
Yes, correct.
And I've seconded that motion and now we're discussing. Any other discussion, anyone? Giving you time to think. Diane? Is what you're about to say going to affect any of this, or is it too quick of a vote, or are you okay with that?
you know what, I'm fine right now. There's a lot to be worked out during the legislative process, while we're drafting. So I think we've got the right recommendations here.
Okay, and it addresses a lot. I feel that this addresses, it goes through line by line with planning, with the legislation, and addresses, it gives a recommendation. And honestly, we can add stuff to it as it goes to the council. I mean, as an individual, you can go to the follow-on meetings and make suggestion or submit it to the city council as part of public testimony. So it's a living document at this point that goes up that we're commenting on. So it's not stopping with us for sure. So I've heard the first, second. Any other discussion? All those in favor of supporting these recommendations and amendments as so drafted by Chairman Waldman, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. It passes unanimously as our recommendation, as part of our recommendation to the city council. And that takes care of both, I believe, the plan as well as the legislation item for that issue. Any other questions, Dr. Nash, if you happen to still be on and not on a break, taking care of other business with regard to that, or staff, any other questions with regard to that item? Wonderful. Okay, well, that will conclude it. And also for the public, you can always submit more comment up the chain through planning and zoning as this item moves on to the city council for hearing, and also committees that will happen after that. And the Maritime Task Force will still be meeting. And Eileen, can you enlighten us on maybe when the next meeting you guys might have that the public might be able to watch or make input to?
Yes.
Before we move on. So were we going to also entertain these several comments that Ms. Butler had?
Yes.
Yeah. So before you move on, Ben?
Yeah, that's a good one. That's I'm trying to move too quickly. So Diane, please go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Blind.
Okay, you know what? I just did something. I'm not on my normal computer. And now I wanted to share my screen to show the proposed recommendations. And now I can't do it.
Well, while you're figuring that out, I'll get Eileen to state when the next Maritime Task Force meetings are for the public. So the public watching this can have that say.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank the commission for your terrific work here. Depending on, I believe there will be a hearing on the 13th of September to introduce a resolution to introduce the adoption of the Maritime Task Force plan. And then I believe there will be, this is tentative, actual hearing on September 20th to hear the adoption of the Maritime Task Force plan, and then to hear the ordinance 02521. So they'll both be heard separately. And let me make sure those are the correct dates. Those are council dates. I believe it's the 13th and the 20th. Yes, the 13th is for introduction of the resolution for the task force plan, and the 20th is for the hearing on both the plan and the ordinance.
Okay, thank you for that. And I encourage any of the few concerns or dissenters we had out there that we've heard through our public testimony here, please keep inserting yourself in the process as it goes up to the city council, because any concerns can still be heard again and maybe get more traction there if you didn't feel like you got enough traction here. And back to Diane, I believe you're ready with these additional items. Or,
Yes.
there you go. We see it.
So I just, shared my document, and these were circulated earlier, I think on Saturday, as actual, draft language for the ordinance. And that was after talking to Eileen and Eric. But after talking to Bob, it makes more sense to just include them as recommendations instead of trying to parse out the language at this point. So I sort of agree with that. So I just wanted to talk about compliance a little more. I wanted to really get to the issue of compliance for maritime owners who haven't been complying with the current code, and how do we make sure we don't reward that situation? So we said owners need to be in compliance with prior to the application for any non-maritime use at all. And it should be based on the approved site plans and plat plan approvals, including any corresponding conditions on record. And, I'm not going to try to get to the language, but I think it really is important to say that a lot of our maritime owners have complied. And if you haven't complied and the city hasn't called you on it, you have to prove that somehow you deserve to be able to apply for the non-maritime use. So that was the one revision I worked out with Eileen and we talked about with Eric. And the next one really has to do with sustainability, sea level rise. We really want to limit the development within the 100 feet of the water in those waterway yards because of flooding and because of sea level rise. It doesn't make sense to put, we talked about this last time, any buildings on the waterfront. If they exist right now, that's fine. We didn't understand sea level rise at the time. Now we do. So we want to keep those boatyards, working boatyards. And so that just means making sure the definition of boatyard is something that is worked out, which I think we'll talk about in a minute. Whoops, what did I do? Did I just lose the screen?
We still see your screen, and we'll talk about each one like we
Okay,
did
great.
last time after you present them. So present them and we'll go through each one.
Yeah, I meant to just scroll down, and I'm on somebody else's computer where I can't scroll right, so I'm not sure.
It might be delayed.
Okay. So then I want to talk about pump out stations. I think that it's important that we add language to require existing facilities that have pump outs to continue that use as sort of a precondition for approval or for application of any additional non-maritime use. We know of at least one landowner who basically threatened to pull the pump out away from use if they didn't get their way in a particular situation. And that's not good, because especially on Spot Creek, as I mentioned last time, but also on Beck Creek, we really, really need our pump out stations because we have such a high concentration of boating activity on these great creeks. The water access plan, I think Bob's recommendations do a great job of really covering this. And I was just saying we need a time frame or date certain that this should be started and completed, or otherwise we know it's going to drag. It's not because people don't really want to address it, it's just because there's so much on everyone's plate. So I think Bob's recommendations were good there. I wanted to make sure the definition of a working boatyard was clarified, because the task force did a great job of distinguishing between boatyards and marinas. And you'll recall marinas generally are very, very profitable. So we do want to talk about boatyards versus marinas, and it makes sense. My proposed language is below. And again, we can draft that till the cows come home, but I do think it has to be more concrete as to the fact that it's property, not the slips. Then the Maritime Enterprise Funds. I think this is the time to really get a mechanism for funding down, because it's been talked about since the very beginning of the very first report, and survey that was done from, the Annapolis maritime zones, and we still haven't done it. We just keep talking about it. And there are places like Newport that have enterprise funds that are up and running, and they do use them to recruit businesses and to retain the current businesses they have and to develop maritime workforce. So I think it's time to do it. But this is when we have the most leverage. So I think we should say something like, you don't even get to apply to have additional non-maritime use unless you go through the funding mechanism that has to be set up first. So that puts pressure on the city council to work with these maritime property owners to set up that funding mechanism, to come to some agreement, because they're not going to do it after the fact. We know that. And it was interesting. I watched the Maritime Advisory Board last week, and I thought Debbie Goslin asked some good questions. She said, her question really was, what was the amount of revenue that they wanted to seed the Maritime Enterprise Fund with, or basically she was asking what were the expected revenues. And, the answer was, well, we don't know, because we don't really have an idea of how it's going to work. So I think that just points out the importance of getting it going, having some real words around what this means. And it's interesting, Patrick Shaughnessy had also mentioned in the task force that he thinks places like Newport have put in $1 million, and that was the seed money for what they do now. I asked, does anyone from the city know exactly how they're funding some of these enterprise zones? And maybe the research has been done and I don't know about it, or we didn't get that information, but the research can be done and we can get something up and running. It's really important that we do that and stop talking about it. We did the first survey for maritime zones in 1986, and in 2013 was the last one, and each one of those recommended that we do the enterprise zone. So my recommendation would be to do it now. And that's all I have. Oh, I did want to mention one. Has everyone seen the study by Urban 3 about the benefit of water access, public versus private water access? They actually used a lakefront, 2 different lakefronts in Minnesota, and it showed that the land values in the city where they allowed more access to this natural asset, in this case it was a lake, but in our case it would be a creek or creeks. The land values are much higher and go deeper into the town than the ring effect that you have when you have just a bunch of expensive properties that wall off the water around a creek or lake. So people keep saying, what are the advantages of allowing public water access? It's a huge fiscal advantage for our city. I just wanted to point that out. And if anyone wants to see those studies, I can recirculate them.
Yeah, I've read that before and it's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's it.
Okay, we can start with number 1. I had a question for 1 alpha. Owners need to be in compliance prior to application for any non-maritime use.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make it clear, are you actually referring to what their application is proposing to do, or should they be in compliance for everything they've done prior to that, prior to not having any violations for what they're currently operating?
Currently operating. What you said, second part of that.
The latter, not the former.
Correct.
Okay. So owners need to be in compliance with existing, that would need to be stated in there so there's no confusion. Because it almost makes it like, well, you need to be in compliance with what you're applying for, but when you make an application, you can't be in compliance because you still haven't built that and done everything you would need to be in compliance, which is why you're getting an application.
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's a very good addition.
Clarify that, and then in 1 Charlie, it's a little bit of wordsmithing maybe to make it more clear as the sentence runs on after authorities.
Right.
You know what I mean when you read
Yeah,
it.
I can make that 2 sentences and not a run-on sentence.
Well, I mean, it just, compliance determinations made by the original approving authority and include record of past performance and priority scrutiny of projects. A little bit of wordsmithing there.
Yep, I can clean that up. And again, it's really not the exact language that would be there. It would just be just trying to get to the point. What I'm saying is that it's everything after the ordinance was put into effect.
And I think this could maybe all be summed up is that this compliance should be part of any application, sort of proof of compliance as a piece of an application,
Mhm.
just to, try to cut down on having too many steps here. Like, okay, before you have to prove compliance, then you can submit an application. I would think proof of compliance would be section 1 of an application kind of thing.
Right, I agree. Part of an application. Correct.
Yeah, so I mean, those are just ways you might improve that to streamline it a little bit.
Right.
What if you're not in compliance and you're making an application which actually makes you or helps you get to compliance? You know what I mean? It's kind of a,
No, I think, because I know, I think I understand what you're saying, but I think if you haven't complied with what you already have, asking for more, I mean, if your argument is we have to have more non-maritime to be able to comply, I don't really, that's not what we're getting at here. And
I mean, I see what your theme is, and I just want to make sure it's clear as it goes up the chain.
Yep.
And some of these that you talk about here are already encompassed by Bob's comments and some of his comments. So
right.
Out of all of these, so should we add this additional revisions as a separate thing as a whole, even though if they're duplicative? Or
I wouldn't mind trying to put them in under Bob's, but it's up to.
what do you feel is not encompassed in Bob's recommendations?
Well, I think the part about the Maritime Fund actually having to be established and a mechanism in place before you can apply to, or before you're eligible to ask for more. I didn't see that particularly, or maybe I missed it, but Bob, did you say that in any of your recommendations?
No, I didn't get involved in industry funding.
So maybe that's the only one, Ben?
And pump out stations are talked about, but I don't know if to the level of what you have. I can't see below because your screen's not rotating.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to get back to where I can scroll down. Shoot, I did something really.
Why don't you stop share and then reset the screen and then share what the new screen would display?
Okay, it says.
Try that.
Okay.
Okay, you stop share successfully. That's good. And then scroll down and then reshare. Maybe that'll work. I think we're being hacked by those IT hackers in Eastport right now. They're hacking up this thing.
Whenever I go to scroll, it takes me off the.
Just kidding, Ross.
Let's see if I can do this.
It's still in the same spot.
Right,
But okay,
here we go. I found
there we go. It's rotated. Good. Thank you.
Okay.
There we go. Let's look at that right there. Adding a time frame to when the water access plan must be completed. I mean, those are kind of a living plan with any comp plan, and they go indefinitely. If you had and what if you got to a time frame when it expired?
Well, I think what Bob just said is that maybe a year is reasonable. So we really want that done in a year, because if we don't have an access plan in a year, people are going to be walling off, as many places they can within that year. So we really.
You're saying the water access plan is a plan to be completed, but not actually being implemented within a time frame. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I guess, right.
Because the way I read that is add a time frame to when the water access plan, which already exists, must be completed. That means.
No, we don't have a water access plan at all.
Right, but I'm just saying, when you get one, you want to add a time frame for implementation, or you're looking for a time frame to when we actually develop a plan.
Well, I would love it, obviously, if we could both draft a plan and implement it as quickly as we did this. This was lightning speed. So, if we had the same desire to do a water access plan as we did to give non-maritime, that would be awesome. So
this is lightning speed. We ought to hire Eileen again then, I guess.
I
glaring support.
I second that motion.
Oh, well, hey, look at that. Look at that. We're selling it. All right. So the water access plan.
Yeah,
Go ahead. Boatyard, any comments there? Or Maritime Enterprise Fund? All right, so how do we want to implement this? Some of it's already addressed, except for the items that you want. So Diane, if you can identify the items you would like to add on as recommendations, we can do that.
Okay, I would say,
Vote.
I've typed up some recommendations.
For this, including her for this?
Yes, using her draft, using that document.
okay,
So if you'd stop sharing that, I'll throw this one up and then you guys can talk about recommendations. Thank you. All right. How are we looking?
Good.
Okay. All right. Look, I'll tell you personally what my concern is with number one is like, how the hell do you determine that somebody is in or not in compliance? I mean, it's a burden on staff. It's a burden on everybody. It's a nice idea, and we need to figure out how to implement it properly. I do agree that it should be the attestation by the applicant that it's they're in compliance should be a part of the application, but somebody's got to go look at it. Got to go see whether they're using the boatyard as they say they're using it. I don't know how to deal with that one, but what I have figured out how to deal with is what happens from there on. And if the person, I propose that the application is reviewed by P&Z and they decide whether they're in compliance or not.
well, one of the things so one of the conversations that we had, with some staff is that if you include if it's more than one authority, so if it was like the planning and zoning director and the planning commission that actually approved the site plan and
Hold
or
on,
the,
Ms. Butler, let me finish, okay,
sorry.
before you jump in, okay?
yep,
Okay. So, application. The owner makes an application. He affirms under whatever. Says I'm in compliance. Okay. P&Z, and this is the part I don't understand. Somebody has to look at this application and go to the place and determine whether it's the truth or not. If the P&Z decides that everything is okay, it's copacetic, go. They decide you're on. If they decide you're not in compliance, okay, then the guy either gets into compliance or he takes an appeal. And that appeal would go to that original approving authority, either the Board of Appeals or the Planning Commission, or I guess it was, the Department of P&Z, and somebody needs to decide it. I haven't figured all that out. But that only if the department decides they're not in compliance, then they can appeal to us and say, look, I can't be in it, times have changed, I'm trying, whatever their arguments are and their pleas are, fine. And then that originally approving authority, Board of Appeals, Planning Commission, can then override the Department of P&Z and let the guy do what he wants to do. That's how I see this happening. But I don't feel like I've got the time in my life to be reviewing people's applications for compliance.
well, I don't think it's going to be a big issue because there's not going to be that many there's how many of these properties are going to be able to apply for this 15%? I thought we talked about it being a small number based on the size of the yard and, whether they even fit with the, recommendation. So it's a small number.
I don't know that. I don't feel like I have my arms around that, but I could see 15 or 20 of these things coming in.
Well,
And
can
I
we
don't
ask,
feel capable
is staff on the line?
of deciding whether each one of them is in compliance. I don't have any investigative staff. I don't have anybody. I have to depend on the Department of Planning and Zoning. And if they make a determination that they're in or out of compliance, fine. Then we can take it from there.
Bob, I don't even see 1A through C as even being an issue because it's already law.
I know, but Ben, we already have some situations where we are not getting enforcement.
I get that, but what you're suggesting here doesn't really change anything because you're supposed to already be in compliance for non-maritime use by law anyway. So you're just stating that they need to be in compliance. Well, of course, because it's the law already.
Right, but in those cases where it's
somebody
not,
should follow the law. So I don't even have an issue. You can say 1A through C and recommend it all you want because it's It's already law, in my
Right.
opinion.
And that's where we came down when we were discussing it, with staff. It was just that we thought it might be better if there was some way to give the planning commission some role in helping the city do what it should be doing anyway, which is enforcing the law. And if that's not happening for whatever reason, we have the ability to support what planning and zoning knows it could or should be doing. And we're just making it easier for them to do that because we're stepping in and saying, that's right, you aren't complying. You're not getting the opportunity to apply for additional non-maritime until you come into compliance. It's like a support role that we're playing to P and Z. And again, I think it's just a handful. And there might be just somebody on the call right now or on this meeting that knows the number of potential places that would apply. Isn't it something like 5, 6?
I mean, I get what you're saying, but Bob, I have no problems with 1A through C in the recommendation because it really doesn't change anything by its verbiage anyway as it's written, in my opinion. So it's a nice statement to make it known to them, but I don't think it really changes anything. So I don't worry about it. That's my view on it. Anyone else? 1A through C in recommendation? Okay.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with that. I think it's really going to be incumbent on any applicant to show that, if they want this, they'll do the work to show that they're said that in the past they've done what they said they were going to do.
And everything in the recommendation, planning and zoning already does anyway. So
Yeah.
It's just emphasizing.
Yeah, it helps the department out because it's one thing to try to go enforce something that's like, in the past, even though, it's current and it's like shutting the guy down. That's difficult to do. But the guy comes in and wants something more and new. That's the opportunity for the department to say,
Right.
And on the planning commission, we've done that with people with applications. When they come in and they haven't really complied with what we've done in the past, we look at them unfavorably.
Right.
That's been done. So it's already being done. So
Right.
you
And
can
this
say it
helps-
again. I have no problem with it.
This supports the department. It does give them more work, but it does support the department's, decision. Could be a negative decision.
I don't know. Everything stated in there, I believe they already do anyway.
Well, I don't know that they do, but we should stay.
So,
All right.
number 2, sustainability, sea level rise. Any issues with that, anyone?
Now, what isn't something like this already in the legislation?
I thought so, but Eileen, are you still there? Or Eric? I thought this was something we added because we were confirming that we really don't want anything but real boat yards within the that waterway yard.
So the way the legislation reads, it says we have added an amendment that says there can only be working boatyard activities in anything in the future in that 100-foot waterway yard. But I think this is what Diane has said here. Let me look at it. Goes a little bit further. Diane, can you pull the waterway yard is what I'm looking for. Okay, recommendation, none shall not be allowed within 100 feet of the waterway yard. I will look up, and Eric, if you and I both look up, I think we added that, but let's confirm.
I can confirm. I mean, the way we're doing it is that in the section on professional office use and also in the section on non-maritime retail use, we expressly do not allow those uses within the 100-foot zone from the waterfront or the mean high water line.
I have a question, Eric.
Yeah.
I have a question. I understand it in a boatyard situation, but what if you've already got a building you've already got a building within 100 feet? Okay? And there are some non-maritime and some maritime uses within the building, but the general use is professional office space. Right? So how do we do this? I mean, say somebody's got a non-maritime use that's existing, in a fronting onto the harbor. His window shows Spa Creek, and he's within 100 feet of the waterfront.
This is future.
In the future, we're very clear in the amendments. In the future,
Right.
for structures constructed after the date of this ordinance, these uses are not permitted located within 100 feet of the waterfront.
I think that makes more sense, because if we say this, the way it's stated here, what are you gonna tell some guy, no, I'm not gonna rent you the waterfront view because you're a dentist?
No,
Well, the waterway yard is something which was always intended to be strictly working maritime. That is what it was intended to be. Whether or not somebody has an existing structure and how they're renting it out, I think that's what Diane was trying to get to.
Yeah,
So
I
what
think
Diane
that-
is trying to get to is no new construction.
right.
The way it's currently written is a double negative, so it would actually permit it within 100 feet. So might want to modify that sentence.
Right, no new construction.
So it's actually would benefit it. And I don't like the 100 feet, honestly, myself. I think it could be less than that. 100 feet's
I
quite
like
a
the
bit.
amendment. I like the amendment. It's much clearer. This is not clear.
And the piece, and so we'll get to this issue of a working boatyard, but the way that sustainability thing is written, you couldn't have like the dock masters if you had a marina. And so thinking a little bit ahead about this definition of a working boatyard, which I happen to agree with. If you had the dock master for a marina, that means you couldn't put it there because that's a part of a marina and not part of a working boatyard. So
I see. So using what Eric was saying, you
Yeah,
prohibit, professional office buildings
basically no new non-maritime uses within 100 feet.
right.
So
I need
if Jabin's,
clarification.
as an example, if Jabin's going to put in a restaurant in WMI, he can't build a new building to put his restaurant right on the waterfront.
Right.
No,
But if he's got an existing building, he can put it in there.
I guess.
And I got a quick clarification question from Eileen, and this may sound stupid at this point, but take for instance Horn Point Harbor Marina, which has a bunch of office buildings in a 2-story building configuration, well within 100 feet, well within 50 feet of the water line, and they have multiple it's all offices in there to be rented out. That's what the building was designed for, and they rent to numerous functions. There's even a legislative lobbying office in there which is non-maritime in its theme. But there's other ones for selling sails. There's other ones for selling boats and things like that. So are all of those non-maritime or just the one I described as being a legislative lobbying office?
Well, without being, and this is perhaps a question to Sally, without having gone through that property, that is in WME, and there is no non-maritime currently in WME. So in theory, that property should not have any non-maritime. But I'll let Sally opine on that.
But it is an example of a building within 50 feet of the
Yes.
water line. It's like
Yes.
it's like 15 feet to the water line, and it's designed to be offices, and I just don't want us to limit here things like that, which are already in existence.
No, they're in existence. We're saying we wouldn't add anything new, Ben. I'm not saying tear down things that are there.
No, but if you have an office, let's say you have a bunch of offices and somebody who's doing maritime moves out, but the only people you could rent to come in there is somebody who wants to put a law office or something. Let's say Bob wants to open up some office defending someone. I don't know, but he can't do it. And the office may sit vacant because of this, because it would be a
No,
new
we're trying to just say,
non-maritime.
I guess I'm sorry that this was wrong, or the way we talked about it isn't clear. We just don't want to build more non-maritime on the waterfront because of sea level rise and the storms that are happening more. We don't want to add more casualties to the already existing problem. So if it's already existing and it's a building that has some non-maritime in it and is allowed to have non-maritime, I would say that can stay.
Yeah, so basically you
And I would
can't,
also say your statement of you wouldn't want to build it to become a casualty. We already have some things coming in down in National Building Code to protect from that within waterways for.
yeah.
for
Let me
that.
just,
I think part of Diane's interest had to do with resiliency. What has
Yeah, that's
not
right.
been clear as we had hoped it would be, is that the way this plan addresses resiliency is by incentivizing land-intensive uses. In other words, a working yard where you have land as opposed to building new structures up against the water is the most resilient approach you can have. Working yards, maritime uses are compatible with water rising because they can absorb it as opposed to a residential building or an office building. So I think what she was attempting to address here was, in the future, let's keep out structures that are not going to be maritime in that waterway yard.
Well said.
That's exactly right. Yeah, so it's not inhibiting the use of the existing buildings, but
Right.
we're not building any more in that zone.
The verbiage needs to state that better, because it doesn't
Yeah.
specifically state
Well,
that.
let me just, Mr. Chairman, let me just refer back, the memo that was shared last time, I know some of this was confusing, but the clarification that we added, it states in the WMM, WME, and WMI districts for structures constructed after the effective date of this ordinance, the use is not permitted in buildings or structures located within 100 feet of the waterfront or mean high water line. So it's specifically about buildings constructed after the ordinance is in effect. So that's really the intent here.
I get it, but if we're gonna make a recommendation on what I see here text-wise, it needs to state it better. I can't let something just go like this. It's too broad-based. It could be misinterpreted by somebody who just picks up this revision and doesn't want to delve into what the code is recommended to be.
Understood.
So any other comment on that issue? Anyone?
So, Eric Lashinsky,
Yes.
I'm going to read you a sentence and I want to know if it's covered by your proposed amendment. No new non-maritime construction shall be allowed within 100 feet of the water line. Is that what your
Yes,
amendments?
and that, it's just that the way it shows up, that we have a separate section for professional office and we have a separate section for non-maritime retail. So that shows up in both of those places.
But
But
the point
Bob's
is that
amendment
the
is
point is though
clear.
is that
Your
there's no
amendment is
new
clearer, Bob.
construction.
Yeah, that's true. Your amendment is clearer, Bob. So we can go ahead and include that. I mean, that's
Okay, I just want to, it's a recommendation at this point. Okay, I'm going to flash it when we're done here. I'll share the screen and I'll show you what I've been typing.
And just so I understand through an example here means, if you were going to build, a metal shed to cover boats while you're painting, that's okay because, whatever, you get 2 feet of water in it, who cares? That kind of thing. Okay.
Right.
Diane, I've been writing recommendations. Do you want me to show them?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
All right, stop sharing.
Oh, let me try that.
No, Bob, you're
Yeah,
sharing,
Bob's sharing.
All right, I'm already sharing. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so there we go. Okay? All right, pump out stations. I made it clear. I think that these pump out stations shall be eligible for a big juicy incentive, and that's the way to deal with it.
Yeah, and I think they have to be a precondition for applying for any additional non-maritime space, because a precondition is much better than an incentive after the fact.
But Diane and I have had this discussion before. Okay, you can't order people to do a business that they don't want to do.
No, you can't.
You can prohibit, Diane, let me finish.
Sure.
You can prohibit somebody by use of the zoning use tape code. You can prohibit certain uses in places, but you can't require somebody to do a Pilates studio instead of a yoga studio. You can't.
I'm not saying you can, but Bob, all I'm saying is that if they want to be eligible to have more non-maritime, we can say as a precondition, you can't have more non-maritime unless you meet this requirement, which is keeping something in existence that helps our city meet its MS4 permit requirements. under the Clean Water Act. It's really important. We can't just let that slip away and hope that they're going to do it under some, incentive that gives them maybe 5 or 10%. They may not. You see what I'm saying? This is key leverage to get a public benefit. And why would we turn it into a maybe could happen kind of incentive?
How is it different from a retention bonus? We have certain things in there. We have 5 things in there. They may not be interested in doing 3 of them, but if they continue to do 2 of them, they get the big retention bonus.
I think it's stronger to make certain things preconditions that we really, really want.
I don't know. I have my doubts that we can order somebody to do it. If you've got a pre-existing pump out station, you have to keep it if you want to get more stuff.
Especially if it's being funded by DNR. It's not like we're making them lose money.
I don't know that we can order that. I don't know that it's constitutional.
It's not an order. It's saying if you want something, here's what you've got to give. It's just a negotiation. It's not saying you must have this. You're saying if you want to have additional XYZ, here's what we want in return. We want you to keep your existing pump out station for the benefit of our city. In effect, it may not be a big issue because as Susan Zeller says, they are funded. They're not going to cut it out, but I'm
going to write it the way you say it, and then I'm going to vote against it.
What'd you say?
I said, I'm going to write it the way you've proposing it, but I'm not happy with it.
Okay.
Okay, you move on to the next while I work on this.
Okay. And then the water access plans, I think you covered pretty well because you talked about, having a time frame. You mentioned a year, and I think that makes sense. That keeps
I think a year is too restrictive. I mean, let's be honest. That's
look at what just happened here, Ben. Check out what Eileen and the staff was able to do within a year.
You just said the public water access plan shall be completed within 1 year of its commencement. That public water access plan, from what I've heard, has some pretty major things which may take a lot of time to work through for funding, development, all that other stuff. I mean, am I right, Eileen? I mean, let's be honest.
I'll let Eric address it. I think there are 2 parts. There are the part that the city is undertaking, but then there's the part that the National Park Service is undertaking. Their portion of it, they are planning on it being, I think, a 2-year effort. Is that correct, Eric?
This is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, it could be as long as that. It could be 18 months, but I mean, it would be better to have a start date, be sort of the recommendation so that we can, be sure that this is happening in the near term. Once it's going, we're going to have what Eileen was referencing is that we're looking to do a citywide parks and trails master plan as well, that this would sort of integrate with. And so that's the vision here, but the public water access plan will be its own thing. And
well, then maybe just start the commencement date. I'm fine with that because you're right. If it's going to be more than a year to complete, then it is. It is what it is. I mean, you could.
Eileen, the public water access plan has in it plans to develop places and turn them into docks and access for people. We're talking we're talking a design, bid, construction.
No, Ben, no, we're not talking about actual implementation. We're just talking about getting the plan finished so we have something to work with. You know how
your
this
text
plan
does not say that. Your text does not say that.
I thought I wrote it so that it was.
The public water access plan shall be completed within 1 year of its commencement.
Oh, I meant the plan completed, not the construction.
You need to change the verbiage on that.
Well, my original one says add a time frame to when the water access plan must be completed, not the construction implementation. No, just the plan itself. Like we just finished, we're working on this plan and it's
Change
done.
the text. The text does not read that.
Well,
That's
I didn't
all I'm
write
saying.
the text I have just says add a time frame for when the plan is completed. Okay.
Okay.
Change it. That's all I'm saying, because it doesn't read that way.
Okay.
You guys are lawyers. Come on.
No, it's the plan. It's not the construction.
I know. I think it's really clear. like we just agreed to pass the Maritime Task Force plan. We're not saying it's going to be implemented tomorrow. It's a plan. Anyway.
We didn't agree to pass the task force plan. We showed our recommendation of support. for the
Right. I mean,
as
yeah, we
drafted.
recommend to
Encourage that.
city council. Got it. And then the next one, I don't have any more comments on it. I think that makes it clear.
I think there are, okay, sure. I have no problem with alpha, 5 alpha.
And the only thing with 6 is there could be other areas that have better models than Newport, but I just wrote Newport because that's the only one I've heard about that has a significant maritime advisory fund.
I would suggest getting rid of the second paragraph, proposed language. The
Oh, you're still on
that
5.
language
Okay.
is too general for me. I think the point that you want to make here is you want to distinguish between a working boatyard and a marina. They need to be distinguished and they need to be dealt with differently, and I agree with that. And the definitions of these things need to be looked at. And yet, you're only proposing one definition for the boatyard. You're not proposing a definition for the marina. And I don't like that definition. It's way too general. Not
Well,
way
then,
too
but
general.
I
It's
agree,
not
let's
way
just-
too general, but it's general, and I mean it's a good start. But how
Okay.
much of the property is being used? You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's what I sent back, but I'm sure people didn't get to look at it. So that's fine. We'll work that
So
definition.
in
I'm
other
fine with
words, this would come out, and the rest would stay in.
that. Right.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, good. All right, I don't know anything about the enterprise fund. I don't understand what you're trying to do here, so I couldn't write anything.
Okay, so we don't want to just have, kick the can kick this down the road further and leave it to city council one day to come up with a way to have a funding mechanism. We want them to do it now. And one of the ways to do it now is to make sure that we put it in the legislation that you're not eligible to apply for any more non-maritime use percentages unless you are going to be complying with this maritime enterprise fund. So that kind of forces the hand of city council and the maritime owners to work on something quickly.
Yeah, it's in the legislation. It already says you have to get it done, and you have to report.
I don't think it does. I think it just says we want to have it one day, just like
All
the
right, Mr.
other.
Lashinsky, I'm going to refer to you. What is the legislation?
No funding mechanism right now. It just says city council will come up with one.
Let me look. I mean, it's in there, but let me just, we refer to a fee in the WMM, WMI, and WME districts, a fee based on the square footage of non-maritime uses established by resolution of the city council and set forth in the fee schedule shall be assessed to the property owner for the purposes of supporting the Annapolis Maritime Industry Fund and associated programs administered by the city of Annapolis.
Right, but it's
So
not
it
done,
shall be a
right?
fund. Let me just see if I understand. It shall be a fund. It's kind of defined what the tax or fee is based upon, right? And it's a separate piece of legislation that's actually going to set up that fund, correct?
That's right.
Correct?
That's right.
But
Okay.
they're not going to, my feeling is, and we talked about this, and Eric and Eileen seemed to agree that it made sense to say that you don't get to apply for additional percentages unless we have something set up, because if you talk to any of the aldermen, they're not going to tackle this. They're not going to, because basically once the maritime owners that own these properties get what they want, why are they going to sit down with the city and try to figure out how to get this fund up and running? There's no more
Yeah,
leverage.
but on the other hand, okay, you've got a guy and he says, I want to do something. I'm ready to go. I got financing. It's a good idea. I want to get going. And I can't get the city to do their job on the enterprise fund. You're going to hold him up because the city council can't get its act together.
Well,
The other
Bob,
thing
what
is,
else do we do?
wait a a minute, Diane, when I talk. Well, the other problem is that you've got an application, okay? A guy wants to apply, the fund isn't set up, or he hasn't gotten his new assessment because he hasn't done his new building. So how can he make how can he make his payments into the fund when he hasn't been assessed a new value to his property?
Bob, all I'm
that-
saying, okay, I'm sorry. Let's just take it out. We are never going to have an enterprise fund. Let me just say that because we've had since 1986. Just delete it. I'm going to say I tried. It's gone. How you're really being short-sighted.
But you can't hold the owner up.
Whatever. That's fine. It's fine.
How can you hold the owner up
Oh my God.
for the failure of the city council to get part of this done?
That's fine. We will never have an enterprise fund. It will never happen based on the way we're doing this. It's been recommended in every single one of the 6 reports that Stephen Rice has sent to us and we've all read. So figure out another way to do it. I think this is the time in this legislation to address it.
Okay, I'm going to look to staff. What kind of ideas do we have to make sure that this enterprise fund gets kicked off?
Lee?
Didn't we, I mean, we touched on that in the prior set with the Botel tax. I mean, this is it's the same idea, right?
Well, there are two aspects. One is the assessment of the tax increment financing, for want of a better term. And that is, there will be an assessment on the additional 15%, and that assessment should go directly into the fund. So that one is not the issue. The issue is the fee. And clearly, Diane's concern is that before people start getting their extra 15%, they should have to pay into the fee. So I guess there are, I hear, Bob, what you're saying, which was our original thought, but perhaps there could be some language after the amendment that we added that, I don't know whether the language should be something like that, people will be responsible for whatever fee is assessed for, whether it would be after January 2022. In other words, let's say Diane wants to see the fee assessed before people get anything. You don't want people to be held up. So we should be able to put language in there that, let's say the fee isn't finalized and someone gets their 15%, that they are still responsible for that year. Does that make any sense? I mean, I'm just trying to find a ground between the two of you that would make some sense.
I think it makes sense, but I'm also thinking that we need to look at other models and see if it's just an assessment on the revenue, or are there other funding mechanisms that other cities are using to do this? And I don't think we've really.
Well, Diane, I'll ask you, how well did our MPDU pay a fee in lieu of workforce for the last?
Really badly. We know that. So that's why
Right.
I'm worried about this. Unless we can get it funded, like right now, it's never going to be useful the way we need it to be to keep our maritime industry alive and kicking.
Well, no, people will just pay the fee and then, get non-maritime.
Well, especially if we allow this fee to be something that's, de minimis, which I don't think it should be. So I'm looking at ways to get this maritime enterprise fund established and working the way it can and the way it does in other cities. And I don't know if it's limited to a fee or some other tax credit incentive. I don't know. There's got to be something there that we allow this pot of money to build up and actually be useful to us in terms of recruiting new businesses, as Pat Shaughnessy said, retaining our business, helping our workforce grow more maritime workforce. I just don't see it happening if we don't do something now. And yes, I don't have the right wording or exactly how it should go. So let's just leave it out. It's fine.
So the something you're
I think
proposing is to hold up change inside those zones until there's so much pressure and anger, that the city council finally does something.
Yeah, because it's much better to give it away. Let's just chip away at our maritime right now and give it away and then say later, shit, what were we doing? That's fine. I'm on record as trying to get this up and running. That's all I care about.
The industry hostage is what you're.
Well, what the heck, Bob?
Okay.
Let's just eliminate it. I'm fine. I just thought it would make sense to try to attack it now because we're never going to get enough. Let's just say we're not going to get another chance for 5 years at least. So there we go.
Well, I mean, if you were to somehow change the language in A to not be what Bob's necessarily reacting to, I mean, it would be nice to have some suggestions on how to get this enterprise fund up and running.
Well, that's what I thought using the model of, some other city would work, but I don't know how to get everyone to come together and do this. I mean.
So the difficult part, the easy part is the tax increment financing. That's very easy. That will kick into place in January. The difficult part is to resolve the fee, and that requires work by staff, by the Economic Development Office and the Finance Office, a recommendation to council, and then approval by council. And so there's not rocket science. The issue is that obviously property owners, it would be by square footage. Property owners are going to probably want a lower fee than perhaps the tenants and some people in the industry. So it's an issue of coming to a negotiation to come to agreement. And Diane was trying to identify sort of you want extra maritime, then this fee has to be in place. But I think that there should be some understanding that, and maybe the understanding is the fee will be in place by January 1, 2022. I mean, that you could just put that language in.
Or like, most of what we're doing is we're making recommendations to city council, and that we should recommend very strongly that they come up with a mechanism to get money into this enterprise fund soon.
And they get it before,
let them,
before people start getting the non-maritime. I think
yeah, exactly.
Nation.
Because that's really what we want, but trying to say it in a way that's not so prescriptive that it's not likely to gain much traction if it's if it's so prescriptive. It has the like the reaction that Bob had, but we recommend that they very strongly they get something in place before people start making these requests.
Accessing non-maritime.
Yeah.
What's the name of this fund? What's the name of this fund?
Maritime
Enterprise.
Annapolis Maritime Industry Fund, AMIF.
AMIF.
Does it say what you want to say? Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, we should probably go down these one by one.
Can I make a motion to just take them as a whole?
I'm still unsure in summation because they're not color coded of which ones you've already are happy with being in Bob's existing recommendations versus ones that we want to actually change. So you can just give me a number of which ones are still. Do you have that? Because obviously you said some of these are already accommodated, so we don't want to do it again.
Well, I don't know. Eric, can you tell me the water access plan language? Does it say currently that it has to be started within a certain date?
Not in the ordinance, no.
Okay. And I can't remember. I have to look at Bob's amendment to see what it says. Hold on.
That recommendation verbiage needs to change for water access plan.
It does to what? Shall be begun by January 1st and completed within 1 year?
It would be the drafting of the public water access plan shall be completed within 1 year of its commencement.
Yeah, that makes sense because it makes it clear that it's not the completion.
Add the word drafting, the drafting of the public water access
Just
plan.
to be clear, that the plan drafting, I'm not sure that's going to be done within a year.
You don't.
Exactly. There you go. Exactly.
But we're not.
So,
This
what are you
is
trying to say?
This is nothing. We're not talking about construction here. We're talking about the plan. Although we are going to be looking for opportunities to implement components of it in the near term. But this is specifically putting together the sort of vision for what public access will look like in Annapolis in years to come, and that process will take at least a year, if not more.
So what's a fair deadline?
Just get rid of it altogether.
I would take out the deadline, but have a start date in there. That
Yes.
January
Yes.
2022.
And that, by the way, was in my original draft.
Was it?
Yes, just a commencement date.
Rats. Not buying it though.
Okay, where are
I mean,
we now?
any plan begins usually once it's accepted as a plan, because the plan has a timeline in itself as it is.
So
Part
take
of
out
the
completed.
Chapter 1.
You just have
How
to
much
take
time
out.
do you need, Lashinsky?
It goes without saying we will want to implement as quickly as we have this plan done. But if not,
And any plan worth its salt has a timeline engaged.
Okay,
That's okay.
I'm lost.
Doesn't matter, sure.
I'm not quite the conversation is going in circles. I'm lost.
Yes.
I'm not quite sure what you
Yes,
want.
it is.
Okay,
Big circle.
if a year is not enough to get the plan done, what is the time you need?
I think what we're recommending is just at least identify a commencement date and leave the completion date open.
Okay, sure. How about shall begin upon adoption? Does that work for you, Diane? Or you have a 6 months you want to put there? I don't care.
All right, that's where we are. Come on, these are recommendations.
Yep, that's good.
Okay, good enough.
That's right.
What's
They
next?
are recommendations.
What's next?
Are there any of these that are obviously duplicates of something you said, Bob? Yeah, Bob. And if so, then we can take them out. But I feel like they're a little bit different. Am I missing something?
Well, the water access thing I said should be begun.
All right. So then after all that argument, then we just use your language for that it needs to commence quickly. And I think we didn't discuss the definition of working boatyard, so that's good. I think everything else stays.
I don't like the 100 feet. I think that's just too far, but you know,
But that's for new construction, remember, Ben?
I know, I still don't like 100 feet's a lot for some of these people.
Did you look at any of the maps? I'm not sure you got them, of what sea level rise looks like in Annapolis in 40 years.
I have, and you can build and accommodate for it. You can add fill, you know?
On Back Creek? Maybe.
Yes.
Okay, I move.
So the question is,
I
yeah,
move that
can
we
you live with it,
approve-
Ben?
I move that we approve these recommendations in total.
I
I'll
second.
second it.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Unanimously passed. Thank you, Bob and Diane, for the hard work and the very active debate, as always.
And I'd like
Really,
to thank Eileen and Eric for all the help.
Okay.
you all care. Everybody here really cares, which is good. That's a good thing. So, all right. Anything else we need to do with regards to Maritime Task Force, staff or Eileen, which is currently staff paid?
I would like to know who is volunteering to do the findings.
I do.
Okay.
All right,
Bob?
will you give me the whatever stuff, the beginning stuff, and I'll do all the draft, all these recommendations?
No problem. Thank you all very much.
Okay, good.
And I would just like to thank the commission. You've really, really put your heart and soul into making this a stronger ordinance. Thank you for just the tremendous job you do.
Thanks, Eileen. You do a tremendous job also. You know, we're only responding to you, so it's got to get better. I hope the council takes it as seriously as we all have been taking it.
Oh, I think they will when everybody shows up for that, for sure.
I'm not so sure.
And we have the council members here too. And any comments from the council members? Real quick, 30 seconds or less, please.
I'll go first. I think it's great. I think the only concern I have is just getting ahead of the water access plan. Just sort of the cart before the horse there. I think maybe my thought would be that the legislation would follow their report instead of trying to get stuff into this that it should wait to see what the plan does. All good. I mean, you could have
That plan will materialize more so, I believe, and it'll develop as it goes on even better. Firmly believe that.
Yeah, it's going to be a good plan. But
I
great.
share the commission's concern. I believe Ellie and I are the only ones that have read the plan and stayed abreast. We're going to have other people pay attention, and I guess it's up to Ellie and I to do the whipping.
Well, you get paid the big bucks, right? The little bucks.
Congratulations to everyone. Thanks, Eileen.
Thank you. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Eileen. And Bob will recommend you for canonization to the Vatican for writing these findings and the work you've done thus far. Much appreciated, and it is a ton of work you have done. And Diane, and your input as well and care. So thank you. All right. Anyone else? Last call from staff on Maritime. We'll go ahead and share with the agenda. We will then therefore move right along. You want a screen displayed properly here. Okay, so the old business is taken care of. Now we move on to public hearings, and we have the Forest Conservation 03421 for the first presentation to us for the purpose of reforestation. So you can't see that. Do we actually have Mr. Savage here, I believe it is, and the rest of staff to present on this?
I have a brief staff report to present, and Tom Smith, I believe, is also here to assist if there's any questions. I'm not sure if Alderman Savage is on.
Okay, well then we'll proceed on and go forward with the staff report.
Ben, before you move on, there was 2 exhibits that came in between the meetings, and I sent them to you in the email. But
Yes,
We
and I had
need to
those. We do have to enter those into the record and enter those in as the alpha of the, you have actually their number, good God, what did you write in there?
There's C6 and C7. It's just the Jabin's letter and the
Yep.
information from Mr. Rice on the economic maritime information.
Right. We were all presented that data and it is with the package. So let's please enter that into the record. So entered.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now on to ordinance 03421, forest conservation for the purpose of requiring reforestation in certain circumstances to maintain the city's current tree canopy percentage and generally relating to reforestation requirements. Staff, please go with the report.
All right, good evening. This is ordinance 03421 or zoning text amendment 2021-014. The purpose of this ordinance is to address when there's changes on site and what happens with the approved forest conservation plan. So there are two main requirements for addressing the Forest Conservation Act, which is required for any property in the state of Maryland outside the critical area that's larger than 40,000 square feet. The first part is a forest stand delineation, and this is a basic inventory of the site and the environmental features and the forests that are on the site. The existing code states that this forest stand delineation, or FSD, is valid for 5 years. However, staff can require a new one if there's changes on the site. So this proposed ordinance adds language that if a new FSD is required, in that 5-year timeframe, it should identify and account for any forest or trees that may have been removed on the property in the past 10 years if said removal has not already been mitigated for in a current or past forest conservation plan. And so staff isn't concerned about the concept, but we're just unclear about how it will be implemented and how the requirement will work in the field, because we're not sure if we'll be able to identify all of those trees that have been removed, possibly before the present owner owned the property. Also, the FSD doesn't necessarily identify each individual tree. So we wouldn't, that would just make it a little bit more confusing about which tree had or hadn't been removed. So what we would prefer, and we think is workable, is if the ordinance said something along the lines of that the applicant has to identify and account for any forests or trees that may have been removed on the property since the original approval. And that way it puts more of the burden on the applicant to identify which trees have been removed and then only going back to the first approval. Also, on another section of the proposed language, we don't think the existing language should be removed. We'd like the existing language of at least 35 feet wide and covering at least 2,500 square feet to stay, as that is the minimum in state law. And so we don't mind if equivalent area is inserted, but we'd like to make sure that it's clear that they have to follow the minimum state law as well. So just some clarifications, basically. Any questions for staff?
So as to the first one, it has to do with how do you determine what changes may have been made since the first delineation? Is that your concern? Is like how do we figure out if there have been any changes? Who's going to know?
Right. Well, and plus some of the changes that the proposed ordinance speaks to might have occurred before the first FSD was approved, since it's going back a 10-year period.
Do you feel comfortable making the applicant responsible for reporting any changes?
Yes, Tom, I don't know if Tom Smith wants to chime in and speak to how we would do that exactly, working with the applicants and with the approved FSD that we have in hand.
You want me to chime in?
Sure.
I think that our reservation, Commissioner Waldman, was the proposed language is 10 years. And what if we didn't have a delineation that went back that far? So our suggestion was going back to the previous delineation, which could be less than 10 years. It could be more than 10 years. But just so that we have the information as to what was there originally before any clearing began.
And during that 10-year period, I mean, what if you have a large tract of land and trees die, some grow in, I mean, it's almost like you're asking the developer to provide you evidence of him tracking all of his trees on his property for that 10-year period and providing you evidence. If he doesn't have the evidence, he can't get a new application through. You see where I'm going with that, Tom, or does that make any sense?
Yes, and that's partly also Chairman saying why I said let's go back to the latest information that we have in a delineation, which would talk about disease damage or the quality of the forest at that time.
Because on somebody who has a very large tract of land, this could be, I don't know, could it, as it stands, could be construed to really be prohibitive to getting past this hump. It just seems that way. Doesn't seem perfect, but I see the impetus to it. I see, and also what's really driving this? There's got to be something that's recently happened or is happening. Come on, I always like to know, why is this coming to us now? What happened? Staff, you can tell me. You can tell us.
Well, honestly, I can't speak for Alderman Savage, but I have a feeling perhaps it has something to do with projects such as Rocky Gorge off of Ayers at T. Allen, which has one developer and it was cleared. It's been quite a number of years. Now we have a second developer. The Forest Conservation Act is now changed to no net loss. What's really there? How much was really cleared? How does it comport with the original? I understand his concern.
And I know exactly what you're talking about, looking over there and seeing it be cleared and then nothing gets done. And so it allows you to transfer. It's almost like you can transfer off what you couldn't do to another developer. Now they can do because you did it before under a different name and a game.
And on a much smaller level, I would add that right now on Watergate, at Watergate now called Nautilus, right before the purchase, the purchase was concluded, they cleared a bunch of trees in the critical area. And now the new Nautilus owners are saying, oh, you know what? All those trees were cut down right before we bought the property, so we're not responsible. So yeah, there's kind of a theory there that they might be asking forgiveness instead of permission to cut trees.
And staff, I hear your changes. It sounds like this needs a lot more work before it would really get through. And let's be honest, we're talking short term of the city council here to the end of being able to get something through. Would there be enough time to modify and develop this? I don't know. It's but it could continue on after December. But we can definitely push for it. But it sounds like it needs some work from what we've seen right now.
I had a question from the staff report. It looked, without, before I had read the entire set of changes in the legislation, the staff report looked like it was reacting also to the West Annapolis project that was withdrawn.
Well, there were forest stand delineations. There was no forest stand that didn't fall under the Forest Conservation Act because it was too small.
Okay.
Right. Neither the West Annapolis project nor former Watergate would come under this Forest Conservation Act.
All right.
Okay, so are the changes that complicated? I mean, have you gone over them with Mr. Savage?
I don't think they're complicated. I think they're just more clarifications.
Okay.
Commissioner Wallman?
You feel comfortable with the way it is, including your recommendations?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
And you're comfortable with it, and Savage, you have or have not worked with him? I'll clarify that.
I have to defer to Dr. Nash. I haven't spoken to the alderman directly.
I've only sent him our comments, which were pretty much what is in my report. And and I don't know if I didn't get the sense he had an objection. I'm not on these, but I'm not sure if I ever got direct.
Okay. So,
Those are fine.
So there needs to be some follow-up with that. And what I'm getting at is if we open up the public hearing, which we will gladly do, I think. But then it sounds like we'll have some modification to it and then a substantial modification and have to keep it open again for more public comment maybe. So, but let's, I think we could, I'm happy with what I've heard from the staff so far and their ability to get this through. Anybody else, commissioners, or staff? And we're going to go ahead and open this up tonight and continue it. So our deliberations will obviously be had later because we've got more business to tend to. So, okay, hearing from staff, anything else you have to present before I open up public hearing of the public comment? Okay, thank you, staff, for that report. We'll now open the time on this item for public comment. And public, the item is posted online and you track it through the Planning Commission website, correct?
That's correct. And we did get one comment in, but it came in late this afternoon and I didn't actually even see it until right before this meeting. So she is going to submit something in writing and I can let her know. I also wasn't sure if this would be held open, but I can let her know she can come on the 2nd. Is that what you're thinking, Ben, that this will be continued?
This will be continued.
To September 2nd?
Which is part of the reason we had this meeting, maritime, and this item gets to, yes.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, and that comment, do you know if it was for or against?
It was in support of the ordinance.
Yeah, that's what I would think. Okay, and since we don't have that one, or I think I might actually have that in email, I'm not sure. I can go look at it on E-Track, but point is we will present that at our next meeting, and the public comment timeline will remain open. And we will go ahead and I'm getting ready to continue this. So last chance, commissioners, to ask of staff questions. Okay, well, the public comment timeline will remain open on this item. So members of the public, please submit your comments through the Planning and Zoning website, through the City of Annapolis. It's a sub website under that. And also you can email staff directly if you need to from the Planning and Zoning Department, or actually go see them if you want to get your comment in. And we will gladly portray that at the next meeting and continue our public comment testimony period. And then after that, we'll have the commissioners talk about the item after the public comments have been presented and see where we want to go with recommendations on the item. And then hopefully Mr. Savage can join us at that point in time and talk. We can argue about the better points of the modifications that staff have presented. This item is now continued till the next meeting on our agenda. And we will now move on. Go ahead and share the.
Then I must have missed it, but did you open it up and no one spoke? Is that what happened?
We opened it up and we had nobody to speak, and we had one comment received after the deadline for today to get it to the commissioners. So we have no public comment technically to present at this time. So we keep the public hearing open to the next meeting and allow the public comment and present it then.
Okay, thanks.
Ben, it's Alderwoman Tierney. I just want to say for
Sure.
Rob Savage, he just got back from a family vacation, I believe late last night. So he's just catching up. I don't even know if he knew that it was going to be heard tonight. So
No problem. And the biggest thing was us getting this open for that public comment period form to get this in due time to the city council. So we're getting what, he didn't have to be here, but I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Any comments from the council members that are here? Do you have any comment with regard to it? Because you can speak right now as representatives of the public.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tierney. Mr. Arnett?
I'm not familiar enough with it. I know Rob and I talked about it in general terms, and it's to try to close a loophole, but I think it's his expertise we really need to hear from.
Okay, thank you for that advisement. And it is so continued to the next meeting. Now we'll move on to O22, TAC 21, Administrative Hearing Officer by Contract established for the purpose of establishing the position of Administrative Hearing Officer by Contract. And as you can read on the screen, it goes on from there. And the public hearing is not continued from August 5th on this item. This is the first time this is being presented. Am I correct on that, or am I having a brain malfunction? All right, thank you very much, Mr. Arnett, with a head nod. Okay, so we'll go ahead for staff to present for this. And also, do we have anyone online to comment on this other than Mr. Arnett that is signed in? I'd like the staff to just give me a heads up if we have people or get them on board. And Lasinski and the gang will take care of that. All right, so over to staff to present the ordinance. Can't hear you.
Sorry, so I didn't present this on August 5th.
I think what we did on August 5th,
No.
Sally, was we introduced it and said that it was going to be continued. I don't think that you actually talked about it.
You're right. You're right. I think we opened the public hearing.
We opened the public hearing so that we wouldn't have to re-advertise it.
Okay.
I honestly, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I can't remember us actually opening the public hearing on this one. Because
Well,
you would have presented it and we didn't present it. I'm pretty certain on
I don't
that.
know that we actually opened the public hearing. We introduced the item so that we got it into the record and said that we were continuing it to the next meeting, just so that we wouldn't have to re-advertise it. We did
Right,
whatever
so
we had to do.
the public hearing part of that verbiage at the bottom there in red, public hearing, the public hearing is not continued because it never started.
Well, it was on the previous agenda as a public hearing item, and that's why it has that language.
But
It's a
technically, the
technical
public
thing.
hearing was never opened because I didn't open it. So it
Right.
didn't happen. And we didn't
yeah,
get the presentation.
You're correct.
It was an item on the agenda. It was published there for 2 weeks, but we never actually heard the staff report and went through it. We never started. We just continued it to the next meeting. So, but gotcha. That's clarification.
Sorry about that confusion.
So Mr. Arnett
Okay.
was right.
All right. So good evening. This is ordinance O2221 or zoning text amendment 2021-010 administrative hearing officer by contract. So the idea behind this ordinance is a pretty big shift in how planning and zoning does a lot of its approvals, in that a lot of the approvals that are currently given by Planning Commission and Board of Appeals would be moved to this administrative hearing officer position. So I'm going to refer to this position as the AHO. And this ordinance would allow City Council to delegate approval authority for major projects to this person, including variances, special exceptions, plan developments, and major site design plan review, which is summarized in the chart that that is included on page 1 of my staff report. Then if there were to be an appeal of the AHO's decision, that would go to Board of Appeals. And Board of Appeals would continue to hear appeals of administrative decisions made by the director, including appeals of administrative adjustments, administrative interpretations, approval of demolition permits, and minor site design. The Planning Commission would continue to have the authority to hold work sessions for development applications and would continue to review and make recommendations on zoning text and map amendments, as well as comprehensive plan and sector studies and that kind of work. Most of our surrounding jurisdictions, such as Anne Arundel County, Baltimore County, Prince George's County, and Montgomery County, have a similar position to this in some form or fashion. And I've summarized some of the differences from county to county in my staff report. So for example, Anne Arundel County, the office hears and decides zoning reclassifications. So when you're getting a rezoning on your property, special exceptions, variances to zoning, and critical area provisions. Also in Baltimore County, that that office hears variances, special exceptions, proposed development plans, plan developments. It also conducts hearings on code enforcement violations and environmental violations. In Prince George's County, the zoning hearing examiners are appointed by district council, and they have administrative staff. They hear a wide variety of issues, including complaints regarding medical practitioners' offices in one-family dwellings and racetracks, appeals from decisions of the HPC, and other cases for which the district council directs that hearing be held by a zoning hearing examiner.
Dr. Nash, can I ask you a quick question on those sort of comps, if you will? None of those jurisdictions have groups like planning commission. Certainly, I know Anne Arundel County doesn't. So that basically they essentially don't have a planning commission. It's done through the AHO. Is that correct?
Well, the Anne Arundel County does have a planning advisory board that advises on things like comprehensive plans and sector studies. So a lot of these counties have groups like that where they have a planning commission, but it has a different role in that it really focuses more on the comprehensive planning and advising that division.
I'm well aware of how those organizations work, having been on a number of them, and they, just to be completely frank here, they're pretty much just cover for what the county government wants to do. It's the cynic's view.
Dr. Nash, did you finish?
Just wanted to give you that context. Anyway, sorry to.
No, just to summarize, I'm almost finished. Just to summarize, the city's Department of Planning and Zoning has several boards and commissions that we staff. Several of these are quasi-judicial, so that includes Building Board of Appeals, HPC, Planning Commission, Court Wardens, and Board of Appeals. Those are our quasi-judicials. And so 2 of these would be affected by this proposed legislation. Are there any questions about my staff report?
Yes. Are these all paid positions? And how many are we talking here roughly?
Contract.
For the counties? In the
If it was
county?
to be done here, how many paid positions are we talking about?
It would be, well, I believe it would be 1. I'm not exactly sure. It would at least be 1 per position, which would be the administrative hearing officer that would be paid by contract. But that person would, if you look to the other counties as models, that person would need some kind of administrative staff.
Yep.
To help them.
And that would be a fairly high level contract position. So we're talking like somebody who's going to make probably north of 100K plus benefits, just to put a number on it.
There is a financial impact statement in the legislation where we did try to figure out how much that would be. Let me look that up. It's in Granicus, but I can look that up real quick and just to give you an idea of the financial impact.
Okay, but in your professional opinion, what we have structured in Annapolis and how we accommodate the tasks that were addressed by this ordinance and its proposal, do you think that we are set up substantially different from other county and state entities or other counties and cities to handle those tasks already?
Yes.
To handle what tasks?
The tasks that were laid out and by what this administrative hearing officer would do.
Yeah, and in your comps, you make some comments about, I forget which jurisdiction it was, but essentially has an administrative hearing office with a number of staff. And I had a similar question: is do you think one AHO with perhaps 1 staff member, dedicated staff member, plus your existing staff is enough staff to make this work as proposed?
I see.
Or are we just giving you another not unfunded mandate, essentially?
I am not sure. I mean, it's hard because you all do a lot of work that obviously the city doesn't pay for. So that work would now be getting paid for. However, we do at every planning commission and board of appeals meeting typically have at least 2 lawyers that the city is paying for. The lawyer that represents you and the city lawyer, the staff lawyer. We have a recording. We have a recording secretary who does a lot of, similar work that this position would do. We recently, for this fiscal year, thanks to Alderwoman Tierney, have been funded for a new position, so we can take the position that Tammy Hook has filled, and it will be very hard to fill Tammy Hook's shoes with a full-time position. So, depending on how many other boards and commissions that person ends up being responsible for, they might have a little bit of room to help with this position. So it's hard to know since I'm not really that familiar with this system and the kind of demands it would be on staff time. But I imagine if you take the work that Chris Beard does as far as writing findings for decisions and his time spent in these meetings, it wouldn't be too much. I don't know if it would be, I think it would be equivalent more or less to what we are spending now on those kinds of efforts, plus a little bit extra for some of the additional organizational work that person would have to do.
I would think otherwise from what I heard, but okay, that's your assessment. You've read it, you've done this, but I thought way more from my initial reading. Different. Anybody else have questions of staff at the moment?
What are the bottlenecks that this would address? Are there bottlenecks? In fact, wait a minute, let me rephrase that question. Are there bottlenecks that need addressing? Are there obstacles? Do things really move all that slowly because of Board of Appeals or Planning Commission agendas? In other words, what is this responding to?
Yeah, that was actually, I was going to wait until ask my favorite question till when Alderman Arnett, if he's going to make his presentation of his slides that he sent around, but it's always my question of what problem is this trying to solve? Because it does that seem like some redundancy to me in some ways.
And to be fair to Sally and the rest of the presenters, Alderman Arnett is, in my mind, part of the presentation and can go, I would think now with staff to help get us more.
I have a question for Dr. Nash. I have a question for Dr. Nash. She knows the flow of things through her office. I want to know, is this responding to a problem? Are things held up at the Board of Appeals?
Well, there are definitely times when our agendas get too full and things get way behind. There's the administrative hearing officer. I'd see it as staff having less of a role than they play now in moving projects through. But we did estimate the fiscal impact to be between $84,000 and $105,000 annually. It's hard to say because I don't know exactly what's going to get implemented. Is the administrative hearing officer going to have hearings at 10 a.m., which is what happens in most of the counties? Well, that means that's a lot easier for staff because it's, during the day. And in some cases, some of these counties, staff doesn't even go to these meetings. They give their report to the administrative hearing officer and then they're kind of out of it. So, it depends on the exact model we pick and how it's implemented. But it could really speed things up depending on how frequently the administrative hearing officer is able to meet, and how often his or her decisions get appealed. But right now, honestly, a lot of our projects get appealed. So and it doesn't, an appeal goes to the Board of Appeals. It doesn't go to court. So that can take a long time. I don't know. There's so many factors. It's hard to say.
Well, we're looking for a special exception or a variance, say for a business in town, and I had to go before the Board of Appeals. I got my application, everything, all the documents are together. You guys have signed off on it. Then how long will it take to get in front of them and get resolved?
And we've already reviewed it and everything, and it's been
Yeah.
at the agency.
Your staff report you're done. Your work is done. It's going to the Board of Appeals. How long does it take to get calendared and get decided?
That wouldn't be that long, 6 weeks maybe.
Okay. Okay. I can't speak about the Board of Appeals because I don't know what it's like. I haven't gone to watch any of their hearings or their meetings. So Bob Gallagher can certainly speak to that. He chairs it.
I have some personal experience with that. This was probably over 10 years ago. We did some work on the house and I had to get a variance. It was very uncontroversial, but there was some other big project going on, and I can't for the life of me remember what it was, but we got bumped and bumped and bumped for something that literally took 10 minutes. So those kinds of things do happen. I think it depends on if there is some hot project that's tying up the Board of Appeals, which we've seen that lately on a couple of projects, that they've had a lot of work to do. It does tend to bump these sort of small administrative things.
Well,
What about we don't know? Okay, but what about the Planning Commission? Well, where have we bumped applicants because we're too busy?
Well, I mean, as an example, the two things in Eastport. Now, I know those were things dealing with standards in the R2NC, but to me, those are quote administrative things. And for things that were basically not controversial, they took a month, something that presumably an AHO would have done that in 10 minutes. Set up, he would ask the same questions we did. Did anybody object? Looked at the plans. It's not offensive. Nobody objects. Sure, we're good. Took us.
So let's move on to major site designs.
Okay,
major plat revisions.
Those aren't, so that's, and we're getting into discussion here. I was trying to hold my tongue until we get there, but.
Okay, I'll stop.
Okay.
That I think that's fair. Does anybody have any questions of staff? I would actually like to hear Mr. Arnett's part of this because I view that almost as part of the whole package, and then we can really open up to the public because I'm giving them a way to weigh in with the staff report as part of the package. So, Mr. Arnett, if you're prepared, could you please elaborate on what Ms. Nash just presented?
Yes, I thank you. And first of all, I think Dr. Nash has done a very fair and clear presentation of what this would mean. I want to emphasize that this is not more city staff. This is a contract, and you can think of it as a contract with a person or persons or company. Would be done by competitive bid, and the expectation would be that this contract would cover the kinds of things where the hearing officer would need staff support for themselves. So right now, most of the major site design things have been sidestepping the Planning Commission, quite frankly, and not doing planned developments or doing it as a matter of right. And so in the days of yore, when the Planning Commission would have open hearings and invite everybody to speak, I think developers have, by their actions, seems to have learned to avoid that. So the purpose And the two things that generated this are all the work that I've been doing with the pre-application community meeting, the work that you just saw recently on the community benefit analysis. From my perspective, the planning staff and evaluation in coordination with all the other departments, all the vetting of the application will continue as they are now. And as with the things that come to the planning commission for a plan development, the staff would initiate the hearing by making their recommendation. And then the applicant would go on to make their case, and then the hearing would be opened up for input from the public. And this last part was excited by the problems we were having with the Eastport Shopping Center and the adequate public facilities, and this whole issue with the change in the code, which you can also blame me for, which is moving the Board of Appeals hearings from de novo to on the record. And the real question was, what is the record? This hearing would create the record. And you're right, this would happen during the daytime. 10 o'clock does sound like a reasonable time for this to start, but it would be held in council chambers with the hearing officer presiding over the quasi-judicial process. The hearing officer would hear from the staff and their recommendations, hear from the applicant and their plea, and then hear from the community, and then make a decision. That decision is appealable, and it's appealable to the Board of Appeals, not to Circuit Court. And the hearing and all the materials that went into the hearing would provide the record. So again, the process, as I just outlined, is fairly straightforward. It is in public. So everything that everyone is saying, everything that the staff is recommending, everything that the applicant is proffering are all done on the record. It would be recorded, video recorded as it is now. The staff can still have representation from either the City Office of Law or from contract help like Mr. Beard is now providing. And so in that regard, things are pretty much as they would be, except that the whole decision-making process is held in an open hearing before the public and open to the public. In terms of the nature of the administrative hearing officer.
But can I just stop you there for a second? How is
Of
it
course.
not open to the public now?
When a major site design hearing is decided now, it's heard by the planning staff and then announced.
No, it's
There's
not.
not a public
No.
hearing.
No, it's not.
It goes through us. That's
No,
where that.
No, it
us.
doesn't. Not if it's not a planned development.
No,
If it's
you're
being
wrong.
done
It
by
does.
right, it does. It comes to
No.
you.
Remember
if
they
Dr.
changed.
Nash
That
asked
changed.
you.
That
It
changed.
was right. It was changed under Josh
Back.
Code, and we changed it
It's
back.
back. Yes.
That's right, Alderman Arnett. All major site design does
Exactly.
come to Planning Commission for approval.
I don't.
Can you finish what you were trying to say before and finish your presentation before we start asking you questions?
Yeah, right.
I don't want to stop you
Well,
halfway through.
so a key to this, a critical part of this is the qualifications of the hearing officer, and those specifications have to be made quite well, and there has to be an open bidding process for that. The advantage of having it under contract is if we should make a bad decision, the contract can be terminated and we can go out and look for another person. In terms of the expectation and the cost, the expectation is that this would not be a full-time position. How many major site design hearings do we have in a year? And I think that, I mean, I have no way of knowing how accurate the cost estimate, 84 to 105. It does, I think I heard one of you comment, maybe it was you, Ben, that sounds low. I wouldn't be surprised if that's low, but I think that it all is going to be predicated on the level of effort that the number of major site design projects that we have in any given year, and that the contract would be paid based on the amount of level of effort that's put in during the year for these cases. And that's all determined in the nature of the contract with the with whoever gets the administrative hearing officer work.
Okay, Mr. Arnett, is that all?
Is that not enough?
It's quite a lot, but I just want to make sure. I don't want to cut you off.
Yeah,
You got
no.
something else. And you can always chime in with more if you have something you bring up in a file.
Sure.
Okay, quite a lot there said by staff and Mr. Arnett for presentation of the package. And
By the way, the Board of Appeals did also give you comments.
Yeah, I read those.
Yep.
yes, so, okay, there was a lot said there, and I'm sure commissioners, you want to ask staff and Mr. Arnett as part of the initial package questions a lot. And I'll start off one with what drove this to come to fruition as legislation? What was the main driver? Was there some angry developers? Was there a consensus of a group that came to you and wanted it drafted, or is this just something that you've seen over your tenure that could be more efficient that you've seen somewhere else in use?
The first answer is no, there were not. I was not besieged by angry developers. I don't think developers in general think of me as their ally, the person that their go-to guy. At least I hope they don't think that. I think one of the big things that precipitated this is all the problems we had with the ongoing appeal with the Eastport Shopping Center and what creates and constitutes the record. So that was one of the things that precipitated this. But the other thing that precipitated it was my understanding in talking with people about how well this process works in other areas in the county. Howard County has a great reputation of hearing things fairly quickly, expeditiously, but thoroughly. And Howard County is where I came from and my previous experience. I talked with Mr. Lyles and Mr. Braithwaite about their observations of this process in Prince George's County, and they seem favorably impressed with it. So it is an attempt to, I think it's to create the record and to have the decision made in a forum, an open forum before the hearing officer.
And that decision that would be taken away from the Planning Commission as a group of citizen volunteers then at that point, right? It wouldn't come to the Planning Commission.
Right, and I do need to follow up with Dr. Nash. My understanding of the current code is that plan developments come to the Planning Commission for hearing under 2124. I'd like to see what code change you're talking about where the Planning Commission is definitely consulted by the planning staff, and that remains in the code, that the planning director can always bring projects to the Planning Commission for their input, and quite often that's input that you do where you go into a work session. So I think that all remains in place.
Dr. Nash, could you answer Mr. Arnett that question he posed?
I can look up the legislation and send it to you. It was, a couple of years ago. We haven't had a whole lot of major site designs come through, although we have a lot in the pipeline. It was 3517.
I believe we started in winter of 2019 with that actually coming to fruition.
It was the same legislation that began the community meeting process, I believe. Jackie can correct me if I'm wrong. But if I'm wrong about that, I can look it up and send you the correct one. the correct legislation.
Okay.
Major site designs definitely are referred to the planning commission for approval. The staff makes a recommendation on major site designs. The planning commission makes the decision to approve them.
That was a big legislative change that happened.
Yes, that was a big change that was made several years ago.
Okay, I have numerous questions, but I'll let other commissioners reign free at the moment for staff questions and Mr. Arnett. Okay, I will go ahead and ask. So my interpretation of the theme here is to put a lot more of the process, power, and decision in one person's hands in a hearing instead of a group of citizens. It'll be one paid individual by the city who's the administrative and hearing officer. And then what used to come to the planning commission for decision and public comment and input no longer comes to the planning commission. That's what I'm interpreting here as that. Is that correct, staff? Does that sound about right in your interpretation?
That's the gist of it.
It's a huge process change and a huge control change and a huge power change.
I would say it's a huge control change, not necessarily process change, in the sense that, say, for a major site design, we're still going to get it. We're still going to do everything we do. We're just going to make a recommendation versus a decision.
So that brings to mind, could you further explain where we fall in that process, Dr. Nash? If and a major site design comes through, does it go to the hearing officer first and then us? Or no? How would it be framed? Do we know yet?
I don't think the projects could come to you for work sessions, just as you have work sessions on a variety of projects now. But I don't believe that.
Yes, the legislation says for planning commission, major site designs, the word recommendation is in the table.
Right.
When does the hearing officer get it? Prior to us, right?
No, you would make a recommendation to the hearing officer.
It would have, it would basically sync it up with the way we do, say, recommendations on legislation in the city council. We do what we did today on the maritime task force stuff. We put it into we put it into recommendations, and then they can take it or not take it, or implement it or throw it out the window.
I'm not seeing where the benefit of adding another layer in there is. You know what I mean?
That's kind of where I'm not asking questions. I'm making speeches here, but it just, to me, adds another layer of bureaucracy on top of a process that, what did we just do findings for? Added another layer on there. So
right.
Like, I get the reasons for all of these layers, but this is just adding another layer.
I was thinking this layer would actually take us out of it and make it more streamlined, is what I was reading. But
I read it as it just shifts the power of our decision making, takes away some of the decision making power. That's all it is. And which we've known this has happened in the past, where some of our decision making power has been taken away from us, and it's resulted in detrimental effects. And that's what makes me a little nervous. That once, if we keep just giving up all of our power, we might look at a special exception, for example, totally different than one single person does. And those are the things that, without having the thoughtful debate, and I don't know, it might take away some of our thoughtful debate that we have.
You're putting a lot of power in one person's hands, which could be corrupt.
And I also think that it's from what our Mr. Alderman Arnett said, he thought it was as a reaction to something that we've already solved. So I'm not 100% sure if that's the issue too.
Yeah, I see, when and maybe I'm just parsing the semantics here a little bit, but when I hear administrative hearing officer, I think of administrative issues. And, I think it would make a lot of sense to take these things that are purely administrative, things like, variances, changes to non-conformances, zoning district boundaries, all of those things that are truly administrative that come to us, and, we don't really add much value there. That could go through it very quickly through a a check through an administrative hearing officer, which would streamline that, would make a lot of sense. But when we're talking about things that aren't administrative, and certainly a major site design is and a plan development are not administrative by any stretch of the imagination. That to me seems not to be appropriate for an administrative hearing officer in our context. Like, and as I mentioned with something like the county, which, you know, it has these sort of advisory boards that are, of, you know, in my opinion, very limited usefulness. You know, that's a different story. And, you know, I guess if you wanted to make all of the boards and commissions in the city of limited usefulness, like frankly, the transportation board that I was on for 7 years, that was a bunch of people standing around talking to each other and nobody else, you know, fine, that if that's what you want, but that just seems to waste a lot of people's time. Anyway,
Okay,
I'll get off my soapbox.
Yeah, we're getting into the deliberations.
Yeah,
portion.
I'm sorry.
No, I have a question for either staff or the alderman, and maybe I missed it. Who actually hires and fires the AHO?
The city manager. So the contract would be issued and managed by the city manager, not by the Office of Law and not by the Department of Planning and Zoning.
I want a comment from the Planning and Zoning Department of, does this, what does it, the way you see administrative hearing officers implemented in other cities, would this actually help and streamline and make things quicker within the city processes that we already have? Or would it add time and scope to what we're already doing?
Mr. Sale, if I could just break in for a second.
Go right ahead.
Ask, would it make things faster? I think you need to ask yourself what things. There's certain things that, yes, probably would come faster. Lots of administrative decision making that could come faster that, you know, is non-controversial. But there are other things that, you know, you have to, would be handled differently, and it could come out of this with very different character, very different tone, very different decision making. But yeah, there's some things that go faster. Yeah, probably everything could go faster. Sure. The major site designs. Does it qualify under the code? Does the factors fit? Boom. Yes. Approved. But without all of that discussion about, like, well, what's going to make it better and how is this and why aren't you changing that? And so it depends, you know, you have that one person, and that one person's attitudes, you know, may make things quicker, but you're going to make it any better? They're going to bring that sort of sense of democracy and all of the many eyes looking at things to make things better? I don't know.
And I'm with you, and I understand everything you already said. This puts so much power in one person's hands as an overarching authority. It basically takes whatever we do, and instead of us being the final end all be all, it's like, no, you're just a recommendation now. And it really, the power lies in one person's hand who's contracted. Really? To me, that takes away just all of the legitimacy of the citizens having the control over the situation.
Okay. Well, let's get public comment. Maybe we'll find out different.
Okay, Bob, I'd just like to go back, or Ben or Bill, anyway, and clarify that I'm looking at the legislation right now, and with major site designs under this new proposed legislation, the Planning Commission, at the request of the planning director, can have a work session on a project, and there would be, you know, minutes from the work session kept, and they become part of the proceedings, but there is no formal public hearing where you would be making a formal recommendation to the AHO on major site designs. It's not, it, you know, it would just be a work session if requested. So I just wanted to clarify that, because I thought that
let's see if we've got the process right in terms of the Planning Commission. Staff makes a recommendation to the Planning Commission, okay? Then the Planning Commission sits, you know, you got the applicants got to come, they got to come with their lawyers and architects and engineer, whatever maybe. And then we make a recommendation to the hearing officer.
That's not what this legislation says.
Oh, I don't
That's
know.
right.
Then
That's
the
right,
hearing
Bob.
officer, they got to go before the hearing officer, and they
It
got to
would
bring their
come-
architects and their engineers and all their public relations
Right.
people.
No,
It comes to
Jackie's
the
And
right.
they
planning
don't like the
commission only
decision of the
for a
hearing
work session.
officer, and then there's an appeal to the Board of Appeals.
Jackie's right. If you look at the table on pages 9 and 10 of the legislation, the only thing in that table that's under planning commission is zoning map amendment and zoning text amendment has
Right.
recommendation under planning commission. Planning commission is blank on everything else except for, as Jackie mentioned, we could hold a pre-application work session.
A work
As
session.
we
So
do.
Right,
As
okay,
we
so
do
if
now.
you go to page 19 of the legislation, number 4, optional work session on preliminary or final plan. This is under the new regulations for site design plan review. It will explain to you what you would be doing with major site designs, which is a work session that where the property gets posted just as it does now. And the only difference between the work session, it's an informal discussion between the applicant, city staff, and if applicable, members of the planning commission. It shall be open to the public for purposes of the public's observation, but not participation in the work session. It's very specific about what that, so it's not a public hearing in the sense that the public comments on it. It's whatever it says in capital letters there is what your role with major site designs would be.
Yeah, we're
So,
not even giving a recommendation. We don't even have to give, we're not even being asked to give a recommendation. We're just having to let people have their say and that's it.
well, you would be able to make comments and that would become part of the minutes of the proceedings of the work session.
If you look at
That
it,
would be filed as part of the associated application. So
But
all
we're
of
not
that
actually
would
making
be
it, we're not actually
forwarded.
making a recommendation to the AHO at all.
Right.
Just wanted to
Okay.
clarify that.
I've heard enough.
Right,
It's almost
it's late.
10:30.
Right, thank you, Bob, that's where I'm going. We have heard from city staff, Mr. Arnett, and thank you very much for those presentations. And the next time, and what we're gonna do is open up for public testimony, keep that open to the next meeting. And staff and Mr. Arnett can come back with any additional information that they want at that time to brief us before we go into all the public testimony again. So I'm open to public testimony now. It is open for this item, and the members of the public, please submit comment online or through email to the Planning and Zoning Department if you have to. And we will continue all of the public comments until the next meeting, unless we have somebody online who actually wants to testify now, which I do not believe we have. Am I correct, staff?
You
No,
are
we didn't have
correct.
anyone sign up.
Correct. Okay, and we will take all of the documentation until for public
Just-
testimony to be presented at the next meeting. Since it is
Just the
10:30.
comments from Mr. Gallagher were submitted.
Yes, they were submitted, but it is 10:30 at night, and we will hear that all with a fresh mind at the next meeting, even though they've been read by hopefully everyone. And that will be considered next meeting because it's so late. Any other issue with that decision and what we're doing with that, commissioners? You have a say so. Okay, great. All right, well, thank you for everyone. We are continuing ordinance 02221 till the next meeting. The public hearing is open. And also going back to item 2 for the draft rules of procedure, we will actually continue that to the next meeting to finalize anything with that we have, as that is not in that much of a rush at the moment. And it is 10:30 at night. Any other comments with the draft rules of procedure from the commissioners at the moment? All right, thank you. And that will conclude our info for the meeting. Unless there's administration staff, anything quick that you need to pass before we close out here for miscellaneous items. And our next meeting date will be in September. Hopefully we can have
September 16th.
September 16th.
Not September 2nd?
Oh, September 2nd. Sorry, I was jumping ahead.
Okay, you were assuming what might actually happen, which is you get around Labor Day and everybody takes a week of leave the last week of the month.
No,
So-
I believe you all have promised that we have a quorum for September 2nd. So if anybody has had a change of plans, we need to know sooner rather than later.
Of course, and we will try to do that, but you never know what happens. Promises are like, okay, thank you everyone for that. And I'll now make a motion that we adjourn.
And I have a quick question. Do you know what's the status of the new commissioner that was just going through the right process?
There was two of them.
Yeah, one dropped out, was approved
Right.
and dropped out, and then there was another
We
one.
have another one that I believe will come up in September, hopefully.
Come up to the
I think
planning
they're
commission?
scheduled for planning commission. I think she is scheduled to go before the rules committee in September for her interview. And then she would have to that would have to go to city council for a vote. But as long as rules has a meeting in September, she would be going to that. And I think it's early in September, the rules committee
Thank
meeting.
you.
Diane, is your trip to Bermuda delayed because of that? Just kidding. I'll go with you. Make room on the boat.
I need to get my boat fixed, and all the boat yards are too busy to fix
Yeah,
my
well, you don't
boat
really
yet.
have to worry about not being at a meeting, Diane, because you have no boat to go on.
Yeah.
Oh, the boat, no boat. All right, I motion that we adjourn this meeting. Do I
Wait a
have a
minute,
second?
wait a minute.
Tammy?
We have to put those exhibits in the record.
I always forget.
It's okay.
That's why we have Tammy.
Do we need to enter into the record the comments from Gallagher? Also the, as listed, the staff report. And what else, Tammy, are we missing here?
The Alderman presentation.
Well, that comes with our YouTube video here.
Okay.
Okay, so entered into the record as such, as that would be, what item numbers you given those?
C1 is the staff report, C2 is the presentation, and then C3 is the Gallagher comments.
See, okay. And so entered into the record. Thank you, Tammy.
Thank you.
All right, I move that we adjourn the meeting. Do you have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? None. It passes. We are now adjourned for the meeting for August 23rd. Please take us off the YouTube video, and thank you everyone for your participation.